Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto brought Sasuke back and left Konoha. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by LeNub and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1, Prologue, Aftermath. Point 1. Rasengan. Chidori. Their screams fade out almost instantly as their strongest moves collide with one another, the immense amounts of chakra leaking from the collision forming a black sphere around the two. The last thing Naruto's mind registered is his Rasengan being overcome, and something piecing into his chest before darkness overcame him. Moments later, on the edge of the flowing river, Sasuke stands over the unmoving body of Naruto. He gazes down at the blonde with a cold, emotionless look in his eyes as his forehead protector slowly clatters down to the ground, a horizontal scratch visible through the Konoha symbol. Slowly looking up as drops begin to fall, swiftly turning into a heavy downpour as a fitting conclusion to their battle. A sudden jolt shooting through his body as his right hand moves to tightly grip his heavily aching left shoulder while he clatters down onto his knees, coughing up a little bit of blood. As his eyes open a moment later, he finds himself with a close-up view of Naruto's pain-filled face. A sneer slowly spreads across his face as he reaches for his kunai holster. Slowly standing up and stepping to the blonde's side, he draws a kunai and jabs it down through Naruto's hand. His hand moves to the holster again as he draws another kunai which he jabs through the blonde's other hand. "This time you won't follow me, Naruto." Kakashi sped through the forest quickly, jumping from branch to branch as his gaze fixed at the distance. A moment earlier he noticed the outflow of chakra and could only relate its source from one thing as he picked up his pace. "I have a bad feeling about this," he mused as he approached the edge of the forest, halting on the cliff overlooking the battlefield. His eye spotting the boy laying on the ground almost instantly, and he dashed off towards him, his eye widening as even with his face covered almost entirely one emotion was easily readable from his face: shock. Laying on the ground, in a pool of his own blood, was the unmoving body of Naruto. Kakashi kneeled down over the boy and inspected the large chest wound before pressing 2 fingers against his neck to check for a pulse. Pakken walked over and sniffed the forehead protector that lay on the ground. "Sasuke," he said as he tried to follow the scent in the air. "We won't be able to follow his trail long in this heavy rain. Naruto's condition takes priority now. We must get him back to Konoha before it's too late," Kakashi said as he pulled the kunai out of Naruto's hands and tossed them aside before carefully picking the boy up in his arms. "I'm sorry I didn't make it in time, Naruto," he said before dashing off back towards the village. "Let's go, Pakken." The dog nodded as he followed after his summoner. Deep in the forest further ahead, Sasuke's stumbling slowly halting as he turns slightly to look back over his shoulder, his eyes glaring while a scowl forms on his lips, his right hand tightly clenching onto his left shoulder. The words of his brother repeating in his head: "The Manjikyu Sharingan, you two have the potential to unlock our bloodline's final and most powerful stage. The only requirement for it is that you kill the person you consider your closest friend." His eyes narrow slightly as he turns back again, stumbling on towards his destination. "Sound and more so, Orochimaru. I will not do as you say. I will not follow the road you directed me into. I will obtain power in my own way. I will surpass you in my own way," he mused to himself. His stumbling reduces slightly, his determination stronger than ever as he approaches Orochimaru's base. Naruto's eyes slowly open no further than tiny slits, his body aching all over, and he found it hard to draw a breath. "Kakashi-sensei, where's Sasuke?" He grunted out between his painful pants for air before darkness took him again as he fell back unconscious. Shortly after the blonde lost consciousness again, 3 medical neens approached Kakashi. "Kakashi-san? How is Uzumaki Naruto's condition?" one asked as he looks over the boy in Kakashi's arms. "He's in bad shape. He has a large wound on the right half of his chest and is most likely suffering from chakra exhaustion. He needs medical treatment, and fast," Kakashi responded in his usual calm tone, a serious look on his face. The medical neen nodded briefly with concern in his eyes. "What about Sasuke? Where is Uchiha Sasuke?" he asked, to which Kakashi's could only respond by shaking his head slowly, his gaze returning to the neen intending to change the subject slightly. "What's the situation with the other genin?" By Hokage-sama's order, the first and second medical teams were dispatched. "We have already taken the injured back to receive medical treatment," Kakashi nodded slightly in response. "What are their conditions?" he asked the same medical neen. "Nara Shikamaru's injuries are minor. Inuzuka Kiba has a deep wound, but it is not life-threatening. However, Hyuga Niji and Akimichi Chuji are in critical condition. Recovery for either of them is still uncertain." Konoha's hospital was bustling with activity as several medical teams were involved with the treatment of the injured genin. Outside of treatment room 6 sat Shikamaru, fiddling nervously with his fingers while leaning forward, his eyes, filled with concern, aimed at the floor, unwilling to look up at the woman across from him. That is, until she began speaking in that demeaning tone of hers. "It's pointless to be as nervous as you are. Sacrifices and losses are an inevitable part of mission. I'm sure you're aware of that. Didn't you receive emotional training for situations such as these?" He looked up at her with a slight hint of annoyance in his eyes. "Training and actual combat are completely different. I knew very well what missions would consist of. I thought I understood all what the world of shinobi was about. However, this was my first mission as a Chunin. The first mission for which I was appointed team captain. Only now do I realize that I'm not cut out to be a shinobi. He slowly stood up before continuing. I shouldn't have been the team captain this time. All I did was put my trust in everyone else. I was too naive. I wasn't nearly strong enough. This is all my fault. He finished, clenching his hand tightly into a fist. What, are you afraid of being hurt? Temari spoke while gazing at the Nara in disappointment of the young man. Shikamaru, however, granted her no reply as he turned and walked away through the hallway. Passing his father who was resting against the wall around the corner, Shikaku slowly closed his eyes and let out a quiet sigh before looking up again at his retreating son. Shikamaru, you're just going to run away when a woman is talking down on you like that? It's troublesome. I don't want to have an argument, I'm not a girl, replied Shikamaru with a slight glance over his shoulder. Yeah, but you're not a man either. You're being nothing more than a coward. Even if you just quit being a shinobi right here and now, missions will still occur. It will simply be someone else that carries them out. Your friends will just be assigned a new leader. And that time, they might all die. But if you are their captain, your friends might not end up that way. If you look at all of this as a learning experience and grow from it, maybe you'll be able to do better next time and carry your future missions out perfectly. If you really care about your friends, then before deciding to run away from everything, considering becoming greater and stronger for the sake of your friends instead, that's what it means to be a true friend, not by running away, you damn coward. Shikaku finished, still glaring lightly at his son as she relaxed back against the wall again. Just after Shikaku finished scolding his son, the red light above the doors to the treatment room switched off. The doors opened and Tsunade stood in the opening. She sighed softly before a smirk slowly spread across her lips. He's going to be alright now. I stopped the continuous cellular destructive effects of those pills with an antidote I created, she said as she walked over to the bench where Shikamaru sat just earlier. She sat down and crossed her legs, her hands resting on the bench as well as she leans over a little while looking over at Shikaku. I'll have to thank you, Shikaku. The medical manual of the Nara clan was extremely useful. I can only imagine how difficult it must have been to put it all together. Shikaku gave a brief nod at the Hokage. Thank you? He spoke with a small smile. Tsunade-sama, yelled Shizen as she ran down the hallway towards her mentor, panting deeply once before standing at attention. Hyuga Niji, he's in a stable condition, she said in a rather upbeat tone. Shikamaru's clenched hands loosening slightly in his pant pockets as he sighed softly in release. Shizen's face in the meanwhile grew dark as she resumed her report. I've also received information that Hatake Kakashi is approaching Konoha along with Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto appears to be severely injured and is in a highly critical state, she said with a worried look in her eyes. Tsunade's eyes widened at the news as she quickly shot up from her seat on the bench. Gather a full medical team and prepare treatment room 5 right away. Go Shizen! She yelled as she clenched her left fist tightly. Shizen gave a quick hi. Before dashing off into the hallway she came from, Tsunade turned to Shikamaru as she calmed herself a little. Shikamaru, it seems your first mission as Chunin ended up in a failure. Despite Naruto's condition, I am certain he will survive along with everyone else. That's the most important part. Shikamaru finally cracked as tears started streaming down his face, trembling slightly. I promise next time, I'll carry out the mission perfectly, he spoke with a cracked voice. Tsunade nodded once before she ran off towards the gates at the front of the hospital to await Kakashi and Naruto. The moment she reached the gates she could already make out a flash of white speeding straight for her, as well as the unmoving figure in his arms. Kakashi, treatment room 5 is ready for him, let's go! She yelled as Kakashi approached her. Both picked up pace as they moved through the corridors towards the treatment room. Tsunade flew through a set of seals swiftly, and held her left hand over Naruto's chest wound, the hand glowing a soft green as she analyzed the gaping fist-sized wound. They soon arrived at their destination where Kakashi carefully laid Naruto down on the prepared table, and glanced once at the boy and then at Tsunade, a slight bow of his head as he stepped out of the room. The doors closing behind him and the light sprung on, he moved over towards the bench and leant up against the wall next to it, a short sigh passing his lips before he reached into his kunai holster, and took out his favorite orange book. Sasuke, how far do you intend to go for your revenge? To betray your friends, kill them even? He mused before deciding to calm himself by reading from his book, his expression soon returning to its usual neutral state. On the other side of the doors, the medical team had already removed Naruto's torn jacket, and several markings were drawn across his body. 5 lines of markings all leading to the gaping chest wound. Shizen stood above the boy with confusion and most of all shock clear in her eyes. How can anyone still live with such a hole in his chest? Any other person would be dead already, she said while looking at Tsunade who was finishing the last preparations. Exactly, any other person would have. The reason he has not, is because of the Kyuubi's regenerative abilities already healing his wound as we speak. Our first concern right now is to fix the damage done to his lung and stopping the bleeding before closing the wound. The remaining internal damage will come after that. Shizen, I need you to clean the wound and stop the bleeding as I heal his lung, Tsunade said while already forming seals quickly before laying one hand on top of the other just above the gaping wound of the blonde, her hands glowing brightly green. Shizen nodded and gave a quick hi. As she follows her mentor's lead, flying through seals and folding her hands with their own green glow inches away from Tsunade's. Both mentor and student were focusing hard as beads of sweat were forming on Shizen's forehead, already exhausted after the several-hour procedure she went through with the Hyuga. Tsunade-sama, why are we not using the method we use for Hyuga Niji to regenerate his cells and heal the wound more efficiently? She spoke with a slightly strained voice, but still keeping her breathing even. Because we know too little about the rate of which the Kyuubi's chakra is healing his wound, thus using such a large-scale regenerative technique has a risk of backfiring. Not to mention yourself and a large number of medical nin are exhausted from the procedure. The best we can do is directly boost the Kyuubi's regenerating ability while concentrating on healing the most severe damage first. Tsunade replied in a calm voice, yet her expression betraying she was all but calm. Was he actually trying to kill Naruto? The wound nearly pierced completely through him. Damn it, Sasuke, she mused while gritting her teeth, focusing on Naruto's lung first as she said was the priority, while also analyzing further damage done. A couple of hours later the sliding doors opened as Tsunade emerged from the 5th treatment room, the door sliding back shut behind her while both Kakashi and Shikamaru, who had joined him only half an hour earlier, looked up at her. Certain she had both their full attention, her lips curled into a smirk, as she gave a brief nod. We've closed the hole in his chest. She paused for a moment as she glanced at the Nara, whose eyes widened at that. However, she didn't grant him time to process it as she resumed. The internal damage in the right side of his chest will take time, and a lot of rest to fully heal. He's out of life danger now after we healed the most severe internal injuries. However, the mended parts are prone to tear just as easily if he doesn't rest. His head also seems to have taken a heavy blow, but other than a severe concussion there seems to be no further injuries other than scrapes and cuts. Tsunade crossed her arms while speaking to her audience. A light chuckle escaped her as she said also, he'll be happy to know that despite the holes in his hands, he will still be able to eat his precious ramen. Shikamaru looked at the Hokage in disbelief at the extent of Naruto's injuries for a brief moment. He had already recovered to his trademark bored expression while waiting for the Hokage, and other than his brief surprise he gazed lazily at her. So, it seems this mission seemed to be doomed to fail from the start, wasn't it? He spoke in his usual dull tone, yet a hint of frustration was mixed into it. Why is that, Shikamaru? Asked Kakashi as he and Tsunade looked over at him. It's troublesome, but we were told to bring him back alive, with or without force. Setting out considering him a fellow leaf nin that went missing, none of us even thought about killing him. Considering Naruto's state, it seems that Sasuke however was more than ready to kill any of us if we tried to stop him. We would have had more chance at killing him than returning him alive. Kakashi nodded slowly in agreement. So it would seem. I can only imagine only jutsu that Sasuke knows that could have caused that large chest wound, Chidori. He finished with a sigh and a slight hint of shame, knowing full well he taught the Uchiha that move. We'll discuss our conclusions in my office later on. I expect a full report from both of you in 3 hours from now. Dismissed. The Hokage said. Naruto's is resting from the procedure, and won't be allowed any visitors for today. The same goes for both Chuji and Niji. You're free to visit the rest of your team to see how they're doing, however, she said with a gentle smile before turning around and walking back into the room while the other two left. What I would do for some sake right about now, she mused as the doors slid shut behind her again. 2 days later, groaning lightly, Naruto slowly opened his eyes a little before flinching them shut again while shooting his left hand up to his head, groaning in pain. Ugh, my head, where the hell a dash? Sasuke! He yelled, interrupting his thoughts as she shot up in the hospital bed. Flinching in pain, yet this time the source more so seeming his chest, he crashed back against his pillow while blankly staring up at the white ceiling. Sasuke, why? He thought to himself while closing his eyes again as the fight with the Uchiha flashed through his mind. A completely lost look in his eyes as he thought about what Sasuke had said during their fight, and his cold, emotionless demeanor while he said those words. Sasuke had referred to him as his closest friend, which only confused Naruto more. What meaning is there in killing your closest friend? He shook his hand against his pillow in denial. No, he wouldn't kill me. I'm still alive, aren't I? Continuing his inner discussion, he didn't notice the door to his room opening, only snapping out of his thoughts when he heard a familiar feminine voice. And Naruto, you're awake! Sounded the surprised Sakura with a smile, yet her eyes betraying her downcast mood. As she slowly walked over to the bed, Naruto's eyes widened slightly as he remembered his promise, his now failed promise, he made to Sakura. Before Sakura could say another word, Naruto averted his eyes from hers and spoke quietly. I'm sorry, Sakura. I failed to keep my promise. I couldn't bring him back. Upon hearing this, Sakura had to fight away her tears as she gazed down to the ground. Trying to keep a strong face, she looked up to the boy with a aware smile. Don't apologize, Naruto. Tsunade-sama told me in what state you came back to the village. I'm sure you did everything you could, she spoke softly, remembering the words of the Hokage clearly. Flashback 2 days ago. You mean I can't see him yet? Sakura asked Tsunade as she sat on the bench. Tsunade stood next to her with a hand on her hip and the other on Sakura's shoulder. His body has been under a lot of stress, both from the injuries he sustained as getting the worst of his internal damage healed. He'll be moved to a room in the morning, but we're keeping him under close observation in the treatment room for now. Sakura nodded slowly, twiddling with her fingers nervously while biting her lower lip. What about Sasuke-kun? He didn't come back to the village? She asked quietly in a downcast voice. Tsunade frowned at the girl and lifted her hand from Sakura's shoulder, letting it slide down along her side. Naruto is in there, recovering from a severe mortal wound, and you're worried about Sasuke. Your Sasuke-kun is the one responsible for the state of your teammate, as he was trying to kill him. Sounded with a harsh tone to her voice, glaring down at the girl who looked up at her with wide eyes. What? That has to be a mistake. Sasuke-kun wouldn't, Chidori, said Tsunade, cutting the pinkette off with a more calm voice this time. Kakashi confirmed it. That wound is unlikely caused by any other attack than Chidori. A fist-sized open wound by something that tore easily through his flesh. Several minor burns around the wound caused by the surging electricity as the attack didn't fully pierce through Naruto's chest. Sakura could only look down at her fingers while fighting her tears to no avail, sobbing quietly. Present, Naruto. Tsunade-sama told me that it was Sasuke-kun who did this. That's not true, is it? Please tell her she's wrong. She cried out as she couldn't hold it in. The past 2 days she had done nothing but thinking about the Hokage's words, desperately trying to convince herself it's all a mistake. Yet seeing the boy covered in bandages all over, hearing him groan as he tried to speak, she was crestfallen by the clear evidence of Tsunade's words. Naruto's eyes widened slightly as he noticed the pain in Sakura's voice. Oh, of course he didn't try to kill me. Sasuke would never do that, right? He said weakly, trying to cheer the pinkette up. But also because he still truly wanted to believe that himself. He considered Sasuke as his brother. How could he just accept the possibility that he tried to kill Naruto? Even during such thoughts, Naruto already felt the answer ringing in his ears. I consider you my closest friend. That is exactly why killing you will have meaning for me. Those words kept haunting Naruto, that cold expression on Sasuke's face. He meant every word of it. He showed no intent on letting the blonde live throughout the entire fight. Sakura was watching the boy closely. She heard the crack in his voice, but in her denial that Sasuke did this, she interpreted it as doubt rather than a lie. Why don't you say it like you actually believe that, Naruto? You know Sasuke-kun would never do that. He's our friend, our teammate, Sakura yelled, her watery eyes glaring down at Naruto, who looked at her with wide eyes. His lie had been seen through. Of course she figured it out. I can't lie to Sakura-chan, he thought as he decided to be honest with her. Sorry, Sakura-chan, it's true what Tsunade-bachan told you. Sasuke said that. He flinched as he was interrupted by a firm slap across her face from a furious Sakura. How dare you even try and say that? Are you trying to make me like Sasuke-kun less so you have a chance, is that it? Fine. If you've lost faith in Sasuke-kun and intend to break off your promise of a lifetime, then I'll go get him back by myself. She spat at him before turning on her heel and stomping to the door without looking back at the boy that simply gazed at her. The door slammed harshly shut, and he slowly turned his gaze to the ceiling. His chest ached, though more so on the left than the right at the moment. He never had any intention of breaking, or giving up on, his promise, even if Sasuke wanted to kill him and possibly would try again next time they met, if there was going to be a next time. It suddenly dawned upon him. When had he made up his mind? When did he convince himself? Since the moment Sakura started on the topic, he was adamant in his opinion. His eyes watered slightly at that realization. He really did want to kill me. Sasuke were his thoughts as the exhaustion of that confrontation took its toll as he slowly drifted to sleep, tears rolling down his cheeks. His sleep was restless, not only Sasuke but Sakura too haunting his dreams. He had never known family, he never knew the pleasure of having friends until after becoming a genin even, and now, both the boy he considered his brother as well as the girl he has a crush on seemed to hate him, their words repeatedly echoing through his dreams, their faces circling before him. Sasuke's scowling face and his cold eyes blurring out into Sakura's angry face, her words repeating in a venomous tone while glaring daggers at him. What had he done so wrong for them to hate him so? Sakura, he felt he could understand. He always went about yelling how it was his way of the ninja to never go back on his word, to never break a promise. And that's exactly what he did. He broke his promise by failing to bring Sasuke back with him to Konoha. But Sasuke, what did he do to Sasuke to be hated by him so much as to wanting to kill him even? He suddenly found himself at Konoha's main gate. In front of him, outside of the village, stood Sasuke with a hateful look in his eyes and a kunai in hand, ready to attack him at any time. Behind him stood the villagers, with Sakura and at the front all glaring down at him. That same glare he always received from the villagers wherever he went. Was that how it was going to be? Was he going to be all alone again? He hung his head low and looked at the ground, gritting his teeth and clamping his eyes shut tightly as she saw his shadow. It was not one of a 13-year-old boy. It was the shadow of a fox with 9 tails wavering in the wind. Demon! Monster! Sounded from the mob behind him, the words he would always ignore yet could never forget. There was one voice from the crowd that felt like it boomed louder than the rest, a familiar voice only filled with hatred. Liar! Useless, good-for-nothing liar. It was the voice of Sakura, spitting venom like she had in his hospital room. Dope, that's what you are. Dead last. A dropout whose only skill is to be in the way and annoy people. Came from his front, the harsh and cold voice from Sasuke. Gripping his head tightly, Naruto dropped to his knees, screaming at them to stop as she shook himself while keeling over towards the ground. an object piercing into his back ending his dream. His eyes shot open and he gasped, finding Tsunade standing over him, who shook him a couple more times until she was certain he was fully awake now. He panted deeply, his upper body and face covered in a layer of sweat as he slowly pushed himself up a little. Looking at Tsunade, still speechless. Bad dream, You were thrashing like crazy when I came to check on you, she said as looked down at the boy with a slight look of concern in her eyes, placing her hand over his chest, channeling her chakra through it in the form of a green light. Good, you didn't damage anything with that thrashing of yours. God, kid, even when sleeping you just know how to disobey my orders, huh? She smirked at him. She sighed when no response came and sat herself down on the edge of his bed. She had expected him to be down over not bringing Sasuke back, but not so far down the pit into depression. Care to tell me what happened? Or what that dream nightmare was about? Naruto shook his head slowly, looking up at the elder blonde as she spoke in an uncharacteristic tone. It's nothing, Bachan. It was just that, a dream, and the thrashing and looks of agony on your face was just a genjutsu playing tricks on my mind, huh? Okay, a really bad dream then still a dream. Came the muttered response from the boy. She flicked a finger over his forehead, but this time without fusing any chakra in that deadly finger of hers. He flinched a little before looking back at her frowning face as she slowly stood up. As you wish. Well, you're doing just fine. I'll check up on you later when you've calmed down a bit so I can get a decent evaluation of your health, she said as she lightly grazed her hand over Naruto's head before turning towards the door. Before closing it behind her, she looks back at him. Don't bottle it all up, Naruto. By the way you were thrashing, that was not just a dream. Bottling it up will do you no good, she said before closing the door and moved down the hallway. He's taking this harder than suspected. Naruto, what the hell happened at the Valley of the End? In the meanwhile, elsewhere in the Konoha hospital, the three genin from Team 10 were gathered in Akimichi Chuji's room. The normally overweight boy, who had lost a lot of weight as one of the effect his special soldier pills, one of the few positive effects according to a certain blonde kunoichi, was sitting up in his bed with his back against the backboard. He seemed to be doing fine as his somewhat cheerful manner had returned not long after he had woken up. Shikamaru was leaning back against the wall not far from the bed, arms crossed and one foot resting against the wall, while he addressed his teammate and best friend. So when did the doctor say you would be discharged, Chuji? Well, the doctor said I should be discharged by tomorrow, but that I would still need to rest a lot. No heavy training for a week at least, preferably not at all. And Tsunade-sama said I wasn't to go on any mission for 2 or maybe 3 weeks, as right now my body is still fragile from the degeneration caused by those pills, he said with a somewhat serious tone before breaking out into a smile as he continued. Asuma-sensei said that he'd take me out for an all-you-can-eat barbecue dinner once I feel better too. The kunoichi sitting next to his bed in a comfortable chair sighed at this, frowning at her teammate. Chuji, you're not seriously thinking stuffing your face with barbecue the moment you're discharged, are you? I mean, you look so much healthier like this. It would be such a shame to eat your way back to your former figure, she said, her voice growing more careful near the end as she struggles to not use the words that are considered taboo around Chuji. What? It's a part of my training. The boy responded quickly with a look in his eyes as if he truly believed that. Shikamaru looked up at Ino with a bored expression on his face. Troublesome woman, you know that his size is vital for the efficiency for his ninjutsu, don't you? Ino instantly snapped her head up to glare at her lazy teammate. What did you just call me? She yelled at him with shaking her fist lightly. Shikamaru decided to just keep quiet and look the other way now, muttering something about troublesome women in his life. Chuji just smiled at the antics of his friends before deciding to change the subject for the Naruto's well-being. Shikamaru, how are the others doing? Has Naruto woken up yet? He asked curiously. Though surprisingly it was not Shikamaru that answered his question, but rather his blonde teammate. For what I heard from the nurses, they are all doing fine, even Niji, who, like you, was in a critical state. Kiba is being released today, though I heard Hinata mention Akamaru still needed a lot of time to recover. And about Naruto, we met Sakura in the lobby on our way here. She said he hadn't woken up yet, but he too should be fine with lots of rest. I wonder how he'll be once he wakes up though, she said calmly, stating the facts she had heard from around the hospital. All three went silent at this for a moment, wondering how it would feel if one of them did what Sasuke did. HMPF, he'll likely be up and yelling he'll become Hokage in no time and acting like the hyperactive idiot we know. Ino looked up at Shikamaru and didn't seem convinced by his words but chose not to speak. Chuji, however, did. Do you think he'll go after Sasuke again even after what happened? Probably, he's too stubborn to give up like that. But I have my doubts about his odds for success about this. That troublesome Uchiha clearly had no intent on returning to the village, Shikamaru said in a slightly aggravated tone. His respect for Sasuke diminished greatly as in his eyes he was well on his way to being a traitor to Konoha. Ino nodded slowly, seeming to ponder something. I still can't believe Sasuke would just leave the village like that, practically betraying all his friends and even his own team. I thought they'd become good friends since their team formed. This earned a look from both boys as they noticed Ino didn't call him Sasuke-kun anymore. Shikamaru just let it be, thinking it to be too troublesome. Chuji looked at Ino curiously, but decided to join his best friend in simply not mentioning it. After another moment of silence, Shikamaru eventually broke it. We should get going. visiting hours are almost over and Asuma-sensei told us he wanted to meet with us for some training, he said as he pushed himself off the wall and tucked his hands down his pockets. Ino nodded and stood up Oswell, smiling at Chuji. Take care, Chuji. We'll be back tomorrow to pick you up when you're getting discharged, she said. The boy simply smiled and nodded. You better make reservations for barbecue though, it's been too long already, he said, earning a sigh from Ino and a slight nod from Shikamaru. Later, Chuji, said Shikamaru before leaving his teammate's room. Hey Shikamaru, you wanna go see if Naruto's awake yet? Ino said as they walked through the hallways of the hospital. Shikamaru looked back at her with a raised eyebrow. I'll stop by once he's awake. It'd be troublesome to visit his room if he's still out. Why the sudden interest in Naruto anyhow? I thought you disliked him, said the Nara, receiving a frown from Ino as she responded in a higher-pitched voice than normal. Don't act tough, Shika. I know you want to know what the hell happened to him as much as everyone else. And even if I don't like him, he's part of the Rookie 9. He's one of us, like it or not, she said. Shikamaru sighed and gave in to her, nodding as they changed their direction towards the blonde's room. Chapter 2, Prologue, Aftermath. Point 2. Naruto sat propped up against the backboard of his bed, staring blankly down to his feet as he kept recalling Sakura's harsh words as well as replaying that nightmare he had. Shortly after, he lifted his hands a little and looked down at them. The nurse had come in earlier to remove the old bandages and inspect his wounds, which seemed to look fine as she reapplied new bandages right after that. He had no clue when or how he had gotten those wounds in his hands, being fairly certain he wasn't stabbed there during his fight with Sasuke. Asking the nurse, she said the wounds were caused by a kunai. And by the brief looks he got he was fairly certain they pierced through entirely. After a moment he simply shrugged it off. Guess I was so busy fighting I didn't even notice getting hurt, he mused to himself. He let his hands drop onto his legs again as he stared blankly out in front of him, letting out a sigh. Sakura was so angry at me I have to make it up to her. Next time I'll definitely bring Sasuke back home, Dadabayo, he told himself. At that moment he heard the door opening to reveal Shikamaru walking in. Shikamaru, he spoke loudly, glad to see his friend again after their mission. Oh, so you're finally awake? Said Shikamaru with a light smile on his face. Naruto's eyes fell on the second visitor that entered his room, a surprised look written on his face as he looked at the blonde Kunoichi. Ino? What are you doing here? He asked both out of curiosity as well as a little defensively. He didn't like the blonde very much. She was always fighting with Sakura over who was going to win Sasuke's heart. And she was loud, really loud. HMPF, I didn't come here for you, you know. Shikamaru wasn't going to bother seeing how you were without knowing you'd be awake, so I had to drag him here for his own good, she said with an annoyed tone as she sneered at the other blonde and then at the Nara. A quiet sigh passing her lips as her tone softened only slightly. Though I admit even I am glad to see you're doing fine, she added. Shikamaru sighed at his two friends. Troublesome blondes, he mused to himself before turning his attention to Naruto. So Naruto, how are you feeling? The blonde did his best to simply hide his mood, not wanting to burden his friends with his own problems that were, in his eyes, his own fault anyhow. He put up a smile as he responded to Shikamaru. I'm feeling fine. Just sore in some places. Oh. How are Chuji and Niji doing? And Kiba? Are they alright? He said in his usual loud voice as he questioned his lazy friend. Ino sighed and hung her head a little in response to his annoyingly loud voice. Damn, even when you're injured you're being loud. It's annoying. She glared at him before turning to Shikamaru, clearly not intending to inform Naruto as she did Chuji earlier. Naruto decided to ignore her and looked expectantly at Shikamaru, being more interested in getting his question answered than telling Ino that she is the loud one. You two are both loud, he stated, earning a glare and a sweat over his arm from Ino. Did you just call me loud? Sighing in defeat he turned to Naruto. Troublesome woman anyway. Chuji and Niji were both badly injured in their fights against those sound Nins. Niji will probably be bedridden for the rest of the week, but he's doing fine. Chuji is being released tomorrow, but Hokage-sama has forbidden him any serious training and missions for 2 to 3 weeks to let his body recover from the damage done by those pills. Kiba was discharged earlier today to rest and recover further at home. That's great to hear. So we all made it back, huh? Oh, what about Lee? He helped me against that weirdo that tried to stop me, said Naruto, letting out a sigh of relief at hearing his friends were all doing fine. Lee? I haven't seen him around since we've gotten back. You mean that green spandex-wearing kid? I heard he's obsessing himself over his training, yelling out that youth nonsense while he does. The training very much being against Tsunade-sama's liking, Ino said, earning looks from both of the two boys. What? Unlike you two, I actually talk to people. You should try it, it's called socializing, she uttered as she fumed at the two, folding her arms. Naruto grinned at Ino and didn't let this chance open. Gossiping, you mean? Just shut it, idiot, countered Ino almost instantly. Shikamaru, once again being a spectator of the hostile exchange from the two blondes, sighed and closed his eyes, trying to tune out their bickering. Man, these two fight more than my mom barks at my dad, so troublesome. Once both of them finally settled down, Shikamaru decided to turn his attention to Naruto again in attempt to get his own curiosity sated a little. So what exactly happened once you went ahead of me to chase after Sasuke? He said, almost instantly feeling the mood swinging around completely. Naruto's face fell as he looked down at his hands with a somber expression. Both the teammates from Team 10 noticed the blonde going silent at the sudden change of subject. But before either could say anything, Naruto looked up with a sheepish smile while scratching the back of his head. Heh, well you pretty much know what happened, right? I couldn't bring him back, instead I got myself hurt and ended up here, he said with his usual upbeat voice, even though his mask was quite easily seen through. Oh come on, you're really going to keep it at that? You were out for 2 days straight and that's all you have to say about what happened? Ino scolded. Being the gossip queen she is, her own curiosity piqued the moment Shikamaru brought up the subject. Naruto looked up at the other blonde and shrugged a little, keeping up his lie as he struggled to strengthen his mask. Something he'd grown so used to putting up, yet today it seemed impossible for him to make it flawless. I just got carried away and ended up getting reckless. That's why I ended up here, it was just an accident, he lied, much to Shikamaru's disapproval as he heard of the worst injury he sustained from Sasuke. He was about to respond but was cut off by Ino who did it in his stead. Raising an eyebrow at the sudden interest the kunoichi suddenly showed. An accident? She sighed before continuing. You know, if you want to lie you really need to make it more viable and less obvious. She said. Naruto looked shocked at her for seeing through his lie so easily, even if he was having a hard time keeping up his facade. Believe it or not, it's true, he muttered quietly. In truth he really wanted to believe that it was true, but he couldn't get that hateful look in Sasuke's eyes out of his head. Fine, whatever you say, said Ino with an annoyed voice. Shikamaru cut in, also dropping the subject just as his blonde teammate seemed to have. Naruto. How long have you been awake anyhow? We ran into Sakura earlier on her way out, and she said you weren't awake yet. This caused Naruto's mask to crack. He sighed and looked down again in defeat, clenching his aching hands into fists, as he pondered on what to say. As Sakura-chan was here earlier? She must have just missed me waking up then, huh? He spoke quietly, not even looking up. Ino, who had opted to use the chair rather than keep on her feet for much longer, frowned slightly at the sulking blonde. Naruto? She said softly. Suddenly she realized something and continued. Worried what Sakura will say. She'll probably be sad Sasuke didn't come back with you, but relieved you're alright at least. Besides, aren't you too much of a stubborn idiot to label that ridiculous promise of yours a failure after just one failed attempt caused by some accident? She said in a surprisingly kind tone, one Naruto never heard from her before. Not directed at him, anyway. He smiled slightly at her attempt to cheer him up and for her misinterpreting of the case, giving him a way out for now. He smiled half-heartedly at her and nodded slightly. Hee, I guess you're right. I must have been worried for nothing, huh? Thanks, Ino. Shikamaru had quietly watched the blondes discussing the matter from his spot against the wall. He too thought Naruto was just worried about how Sakura was going to react about him not bring back Sasuke. But after inspecting his face closely as he spoke he noticed the sullen look in his eyes not changing at all as well as his nervously twitching fingers. He started pondering if facing Sakura was really what was bothering him so much right now. Damn it, Naruto. What on earth happened between you and Sasuke? Even after failing the genin exams for the 3rd time you weren't this depressed. He thought to himself. A sigh passed his lips as he continued his private chat with himself. Well, it's quite clear he's not planning to say anything it's troublesome, but I guess he needs some time to be alone. We know, we should get going. Asuma-sensei is waiting for us and we're already late. That way the knucklehead can get some rest, rather than being subjected to your 3rd degree. He muttered in a bored tone, earning the usual glare from Ino for criticizing her. It's not a 3rd degree, Shika. I'm just curious. But I guess you're right, we should get going. She then turned back to Naruto and continued. When I see forehead, I'll tell her you're awake and doing fine. I'm sure she'll be happy to hear that. She finished as she got up from her chair and followed Shikamaru who was already standing at the door, knob in his hand. Take it easy, Naruto. We'll talk later, he said, hinting to Naruto he wasn't letting up on getting to know more about what happened on their mission just yet. He then turned and left the room, waiting for Ino on the other side of the still open door. Ino grinned at Naruto briefly. I'll be back later as well so you can tell me I was right, she said with a cocky voice as she waved and moved to leave the room as well. See you guys. Try to not let the training be too troublesome, Shikamaru, Naruto said with a wide grin as he waved his friends off. Oh, and Ino, thanks for bothering to cheer me up. Didn't know you cared, he added with an even wider and mischievous grin. He truly was grateful for Ino's attempt to cheer him up. It actually worked even though the blonde was completely wrong about the whole situation. Ino snorted at this and walked off after muttering whatever, you idiot. From the hallway, Shikamaru closed the door with a last nod at Naruto before joining Ino towards the exit of the hospital. Care? Did she? No, of course not. She wouldn't care for such a numbskull and annoying loudmouth like Naruto. She just didn't like to see the normally overly energetic blonde so deep down in the slumps like he had been when they got to his room. Even I have to admit I hated seeing him like that. Such a deep depression is so out of character for him, it's just not right to not try cheering him up. But calling that caring is going a bit far, he's still as annoying and loud as ever. she told herself as she walked down the corridor until she was snapped out of her thought by her teammate. So what do you think? Did he really tell us everything? Shikamaru asked in a serious tone. His hands tucked into his pockets as they both exited the building. Ino shook her head lightly. No, he's definitely holding back on us about what happened on your mission. I still can't fathom how wild that mission must have been, she said calmly. She was both glad and sad about being left out of this mission. She may not have been of much help, no matter how painful that was to admit even to just herself, but she could at least be more of a help now if she'd been there. Shikamaru and Shuji might not have been so depressed as Naruto was, but they weren't much more open about this mission than the blonde either. I'll ask Sakura if she can get anything out of him when she visits him, she said. Anyhow, let's get going before Asuma-sensei runs out of cigarettes to smoke while waiting for us, she added with a smirk. She hated the habit, but couldn't help but enjoy mocking her sensei for it. Shikamaru nodded and kept to his own thoughts, silently agreeing about Ino's opinion of their sensei's troublesome habit. Back in his room, Naruto was leaning back down on his pillow, smiling slightly. Ino's attempt really did make him feel better. He even dared hoping again that Sakura was indeed just sad and reacted that way because of it. After all, she often used him to vent her anger and frustration, so why not for this as well? He had also seen the blonde Kunoichi in a different light during her visit. Even though she was still as much of an annoying loudmouth as he thought she was, she did show a side he never expected from her. She was actually nice while trying to cheer him up, if you blank out the occasional idiot and loudmouth anyhow. I'll never admit she was right to her face though, he mused. Knowing he'd never hear the end of it if he admitted to the girl that she was right about Sakura, no matter how much he was hoping that, in fact, she was just that. On her way home from Team 10's little training session, Ino slumped slowly through the streets of Konoha. She sighed softly as several muscles ached even while walking at this pace. Training, HMPF, what a joke. He just wanted us to run 25 laps around the training ground, do 50 push-ups and then another 50 sit-ups. Who would have guessed Asuma-sensei could be such a slave driver? She thought to herself. Could it be because of that mission Chuji and Shika were on? Chuji did almost die after all. Maybe sensei's more worried about what happened than he let on. She continued her reasoning before stopping in her tracks and folding her arms, sneering lightly at nothing in particular. Still doesn't justify that kind of torturous training. He should know better. I'm far too delicate for that kind of physical training, she spoke up in her usual loud voice before beginning to move on again. Still fuming over her sore muscles, she tried to adjust her pace a little to strain her muscles as little as possible. After rounding the next corner, she saw a tuft of pink in the distance. Sakura? Well, of course it would be Sakura. Who else apart from her mother would have that color of hair? She increased her pace as she ran up to her best friend/rival. Forehead! She yelled out at the pinkette, who turned around and raised an eyebrow at Ino, tightening her grip on her backpack slightly. What do you want, pig? What are you doing here anyhow? She said in an annoyed tone once Ino had run over to her. Comet forehead. I happen to live around here and was heading home. What are you doing here, however? I know for a fact you live on nearly the other side of the village. And what's with the backpack? Ino asked, remaining surprisingly calm even with her friend's annoying attitude towards narrowed her eyes at Ino's third degree. Being well aware of the gossip queen's insistence to know everything about everyone. Can't a girl have a late night walk through the streets or something? I was just getting replenished my supplies, hence the backpack. I just decided to take a long detour on my way home. Even for a detour you're going the wrong way, forehead. You're only walking farther away from your home in the direction you were walking. Sakura sighed and let her frustration show quite clearly to her friend. Well, I didn't say I was actually done with collecting everything from my list, or did I, Ino pig? So just cut it with the third degree already. It's annoying normally, but even more so this late at night. It was Ino's turn to sigh this time. She was simply too tired from Asuma's torture, which he called training, to continue this argument with the stubborn pinkette. Fine. Whatever you say, forehead. Ino was about to turn and leave until she remembered something. Oh, Sakura. Have you heard about Naruto yet? He woke up earlier this afternoon. You probably just missed him. He did? Oh, well, that's good, Sakura said in a deadpan voice. It seemed no one had caught wind of what happened between her and her teammate earlier, and she was planning to keep it that way, which was going to be difficult with that queen of the gossip in her face. Wait, Ino hates Naruto, so I'm sure she'll just let it be, she mused with a slight nod to herself. While forehead, don't be too happy about it or anything. I just thought I'd tell you. I'm sure he'd cheer up a bit if you paid him a visit while he's not out cold, Ino said, narrowing her eyes a little at her friend. The sudden lack of interest for Naruto caught her attention. Even though she knew Sakura disliked the idiot as much as she did, Sakura is too much of a soft to not care about the well-being of people around her. Sakura started to get a little nervous. She did not want to see Naruto, but she damned as hell didn't want Ino to know what occurred earlier this day. And what was up with Ino anyhow? When did she start giving a damn about that stupid idiot? As much as she wanted to know, she figured it best to not confront Ino about it, or this discussion would never end. I'd best just leave before she figures anything out. She turned to leave as she waved goodbye to Ino. I'll go pay him a visit tomorrow or something then, I guess, she said, the lack of interest obvious to her blonde friend, who wasn't content on leaving at that just yet. Sakura, you're not angry at him for the fact Sasuke didn't come back, are you? Sakura stopped dead in her tracks at Ino's question, biting her lower lip nervously. She clenched her fist what was out of Ino's sight before turning back to the blonde slightly. And no, of course not. I'm just rather tired, that's all. I'll just go see him tomorrow then, she said reluctantly. Now if you don't mind, I'd like to get going and go home. See you later, pig. She finished before turning around again to walk off. Sure, forehead, see you later, was Ino's response, watching Sakura leave for a moment before turning on her heel herself to finally go home and to her comfortable bed. What was up with forehead not wanting to see Naruto? Maybe she really is blaming him after all. I'll go see if she went to visit him tomorrow while Chuji is getting discharged, she thought to herself. After all, blondes have to look out for one another from time to time. At least that was Ino's reasoning for going out of her way for that annoying idiot. The next day Ino was on her way to the hospital. Chuji was getting discharged this afternoon, and Asuma promised to take his team for barbecue on his costs. Or well, he promised Chuji. While Ino was happy Chuji had recovered enough to be out of this depressing place, she did not look forward to another one of his eating frenzies. Even if his body fat is put to use for his jutsus, it felt like such a waste to her that he would forsake his slender figure for it. She knew Asuma agreed with her on this, but he had already resigned himself to the fact that the genin was not going to change. She greeted the receptionist as she passed through the lobby and went straight towards Chuji's room. Her conversation with Sakura the night before bothered her still. She had a feeling her pinkette friend was by no means intending to see how Naruto was doing. She didn't seem to care much for it even. Something happened between those two, she was sure of it. And there was no possible way she was going to remain clueless about what it was exactly. She soon found herself in front of Chuji's room and opened the door to walk in. Her friend was already fully dressed in his usual attire, sitting on his bed seemingly waiting for something. Or someone. Shikamaru, as usual, was leaning back against the wall next to the bed with his arms crossed, head hung low and his eyes closed. On the end of the bed stood Asuma with a content look on his face, and something between his lips that made Ino's eyes narrow and twitch slightly in annoyance of her sensei. Asuma-sensei, why do you have that disgusting thing between your lips? This is a hospital, you shouldn't smoke in here, she yelled out before even greeting her friends. Asuma simply rubbed the back of his head while looking away from his short-fused student. It's not even lit, Ino, HMPF. Even so, Ino said, resulting in a slight sigh from Asuma and also from Shikamaru. Troublesome woman, you're being noisy. He spoke while looking up with a dull expression on his face. Asuma was just quick enough to catch Ino by her arms to stop her from charging the Nara. What did you say, you lazy idiot? She screamed while Chuji just laughed cheerfully at his team's antics. Once Ino calmed down again, she focused her attention to her teammate. So Chuji, what are you gonna do once you get out of this place? And why were you three waiting anyways? Chuji smiled widely as he knew exactly what he was going to do first thing he got out. To eat barbecue, of course. Asuma-sensei's treat, he uttered loudly. And we're waiting cause that troublesome doctor is taking ages getting Chuji's discharge papers so he can leave. Shikamaru added in a much more calm tone than his best friend used. Just as Shikamaru had said that, the door opened and the doctor walked into the room with the discharge papers ready to be signed. I'm sorry for the wait, I was held up a little. I hope the waiting hasn't been too troublesome? She said with an annoying smirk on her lips. Ino giggled as she watched Shikamaru sighing and removing him from the conversation with the woman completely. Only for one of us, I assure you. The doctor chuckled lightly to the blonde's response before she handed Chuji the papers and pointed at 2 lines with a pen before handing it to the boy. Akimichi-san, please sign there and there. Then you're free to go. Just be careful not to put too much strain on your body yet. Once they had all left the room on their way to the exit of the building, or, in Chuji's words, on their way to the barbecue restaurant. Once they were in the lobby, Ino walked past the exit towards another wing of the hospital as she stopped and turned around. Hey, I'm gonna go see if Sakura went to visit Naruto yet. I ran into her last night, and she said she would. She said to the other three in a calm tone. Shikamaru scowled slightly at her plans. You're going to go and gloat about being right to him, aren't you? Actually, I was planning on making him tell me I was right. More fun hearing it from others, even more from a stubborn idiot. She grinned widely as she waved the boys and her sensei off. I'll meet you in at the restaurant in a bit. She spoke calmly as she walked off. She could hear Chuji loudly agreeing with her plan to join them at the restaurant later, meaning he wouldn't have to wait. She did not, however, hear her other teammates mutter troublesome woman as she left. Asuma's sweat dropped and sighed at the antics of his 3 students. Her reasons for going to see the blonde wasn't quite what she claimed to be. Sakura's lack of interest in the boy still bothered her, and she wanted to confirm her suspicions for herself. Though, if she had misinterpreted it, she would be more than happy to fall back to the idea of making the boy admit she was right. She did after all love being told that. As she approached the room, she suddenly heard a feminine voice shout loudly from inside, but it definitely was not Sakura for what she could make out. Get back in bed right now, you damn brat. The voice that boomed out from inside the room was none other than Tsunade's. She had come to check up on Naruto's condition only to find him next to his bed doing push-ups. Neba-chan. I'm fine. He was cut off as she had already made her way over, grabbed a handful of his hospital gown, and pulled him up to glare him deep into his eyes. You are not fine. Your wounds may have closed just fine, but your body has far from recovered from the damage that was done. Now she growled at him threateningly, his eyes pierced by the death glare she was shooting him. Sweat rolled down the back of his head. He nodded meekly at her order, uttering a quiet H-hi as he crawled back into the hospital bed. Seriously, you've only just recovered from a mortal wound. What on earth were you thinking doing push-ups? She said as she put her hands on her hips, not keeping her eyes off of the boy. Because, Baken, I need to get stronger if I want to keep my promise to Sakura-chan and bring Sasuke back to Konoha. I can't just lay in bed doing nothing while he's probably already training now as we speak. He said seriously, yet his voice seemed to crack briefly as he mentioned Sakura. Tsunade sighed and flicked the blonde on the forehead with her index finger. And you expect to train effectively while your body is so sore you'll just incapacitate yourself if you get just a bit too much pressure on your chest? Naruto, you had a damn hole in your chest. Even a part of your lung was torn apart. You can't expect to recover from that in just a matter of a few days, not even you. She started with a frustrated voice, but when she noticed the blonde taking in her words, she softened her voice a little near the end. Ino was on the other side of the door listening closely to the exchange inside of the room. Her eyes widened in shock when she heard just how extreme a wound he had sustained out there. How did he ever survive even getting back to the village? And to imagine he was actually seeming to do just fine physically yesterday, not counting the fact he looked like a mummy, she thought to herself as the voices died down after Tsunade's scolding of the boy. She couldn't help but feel some admiration for the boy. It was remarkable how he was able to even get out of bed on his own so soon. And then there was that determination to carry through with that promise he made to Sakura just before the mission. The respect for her fellow blonde easily went from near non-existent to far beyond the respect she had for Sasuke at the moment. Even though she lost a lot of respect for the Uchiha, it was saying a lot that one of his biggest fans found Naruto deserving more respect than Sasuke. Inside the room in the meanwhile, Naruto was still taking and processing what Tsunade had said. She had made it sound as if he would collapse the moment he would work a sweat basically. But I felt fine while doing push-ups. Maybe Bachan is just worrying too much, he mused to himself. He agreed with himself that was the case and just nodded slightly, thinking he'll just have to be more careful about getting caught next time. As if reading his thoughts, Tsunade glared at him and flicked him across her forehead again. Don't force me to set up a schedule for watchkeeping just so you don't go and rip your insides with your stupidity, you brat. She said with a sigh, closing her eyes. No training until I say so, got it? I know you heal faster than anyone else, and I bet that if that wound was all you had you'd probably be up and about already. But your entire body has been under severe stress, from both the fight with Sasuke and the procedure to heal your internal damage. This resulted in a slight defeated nod from the blonde. She knew that deep down even he himself realized he wasn't doing fine. Just too stubborn to even listen to his own body. He takes a bit too much after that idiot teammate of my own, she mused with a content smile. So basically I just can't move around too much by myself, right? Naruto said with a mischievous grin across his lips. Tsunade narrowed her eyes at the boy, expecting the boy to try and pull something anytime now, but she gave a quick nod. At least the brat had understood that much of what she said. The mischievous look only grew worse as he made a seal with his hand for his favorite jutsu, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He yelled as a shadow clone formed next to his bed. This alone popped a vein on Tsunade's forehead, clenching her right hand in a fist as he completely ignored what she told him after all. When his clone and himself started to form a Rasengan in his palm, she snapped, smacking him over the head hard before the sphere had grown too large for such interruption. The clone quickly jumped back, shivering in fear at the angry woman. Damn it, kid, did you even at all listen to what I said? I said no training, she growled loudly at him, her fist ready to deal out a second punch should he fail to choose his words well. Bachan. That hurt, he whined as he rubbed his head where her fist had connected hard. And I'm still gonna train, he said with a wide, taunting grin. Before her fist could connect again, his clone had pulled him away quickly and jumped in between to take the blow before dissipating in a puff of smoke. She gritted her teeth at the swift use of his clone as she glared daggers at the infuriating blonde. When I said no training I mean, and this is the last time, you annoying little brat. He stuck out his tongue and gave her a taunting face by pulling some skin below his eye downward with his index finger. Like I'd let you stop me, you old hag. Ino's eyes went wide again as he heard Naruto signing his death warrant right then and there. Tsunade's voice boomed from out the room again loudly. What did you just call me, brat? Followed by several sounds that Ino could only relate to being something hard connecting with something hollow. 2 panic squeals from the blonde boy was the last she heard as it went deathly quiet inside. I can't believe he called Tsunade-sama an old hag, that idiot, she mused to herself, finding it rather entertaining to witness from this side of the door. The smirk on her face faded fast as she could hear footsteps approaching the door. She quickly jumped back a bit and decided to pretend she was just arriving. The door opened to reveal a frustrated Tsunade walking out of the room. She sighed deeply. Annoying brat. Naruto giving you a hard time, Hokage-sama? Uttered Ino while fighting back the urge to laugh at the whole ordeal. Tsunade narrowed her eyes at the younger blonde and put one hand on her hip, the other resting along her body. Were you eavesdropping on our conversation, Ino? She asked with a stern voice as she addressed the young kunoichi. Ino gasped lightly and quickly raised her hands protectively, shaking her head. And no, of course not. I just came over to see how he was doing. She stuttered out nervously, well aware of the intimidating older woman's habit of pounding sense in someone. Tsunade stared curiously at the girl before deciding to give her the benefit of the doubt. I see. Well, you shouldn't go in right now. He's resting. She coughed at her obvious lie, but her dangerous glare dared the younger girl to question her. Ino simply nodded at her. I see. Well, I'm sure he's doing fine, so I'll be off then, she said quickly. Why were you so interested in how Naruto was doing, if you don't mind my asking? Quite sure you two don't exactly appreciate one another, came from the older blonde before Ino could leave. Ino sighed softly as the Hokage's voice didn't sound quite as threatening as it did earlier. Oh, I was just wondering whether or not Sakura had come to see him yet. She told me last night she would, but she was acting kind of weird and didn't seem too interested in how Naruto was doing, she said calmly, looking up at Tsunade without as much nerves as earlier. Sakura? You mean she hadn't seen him yet since he woke up yesterday? Ino nodded at her, and explained that Naruto and Sakura both claimed they hadn't seen one another yet since he had woken up. Tsunade pondered on this for a moment, remembering the state she found Naruto in. He definitely had woken up once already and had fallen back to sleep, which was a much more normal occurrence than the brat climbing out of bed to do push-ups. That's strange. When I came to check up on him yesterday, he was sleeping restlessly. He definitely had been awake before already, though they could have just missed each other by a few minutes. Tsunade stated, crossing her arms as she pondered on it. But Naruto was acting so depressed when Shika and I paid him a visit yesterday, and Sakura was acting so weird last night. I think something happened between them and I want to find out what. Ino said, but suddenly found herself under that same strict glare as before. Ino, if you're trying to figure out something that may be juicy gossip material, I'm telling you right now to stop it. Even if something did happen, it's between Naruto and Sakura, she said in a stern voice. I have to get back to work, so unless there is anything else, she added in the same strict tone. Ino nodded her head at the Hokage's order, then shook her head after. And no, that's all, Tsunade-sama. My apologies for bothering you with my ranting, she said nervously, bowing to the Hokage before taking her leave herself. She realized just how scary the Hokage could be if she wanted to be. She shuddered at the thought of calling Tsunade an old hag. You'd have to be really stupid to call someone like Tsunade-sama a hag. Really, really stupid, she mused to herself, chuckling quietly at the squeals she heard coming from Naruto's room after having said that. Forgetting about the blonde idiot for now, she made her way to the barbecue place to meet up with her team. She was rather late, but knowing Chuji, she was far from being too late. Chapter 3, Discoveries. Early on in the next morning, Ino was already making her way, albeit at a slow pace, towards the hospital. Her teammates had given her an idea, one she had been playing with in her mind herself as well, on how to sate her curiosity concerning the blonde idiot, and whatever happened between him and Sakura. Even though the suggestion was rather insulting in her opinion, she had to agree it was very tempting to go with. Chuji was the one that eventually told her to just get it over with, and do as he thought was on her mind already. Her family's abilities to wander one's mind. It was rare for Chuji to be so blunt about something. She had wondered if it had to do with her calling Naruto an idiot the entire time, knowing her teammates and the blonde were friends with one another. Or if it was that her endless ranting on the subject had gotten him curious about it himself. She had argued half-heartedly with both of them on their ways home, while internally debating with herself whether or not to do it. During the evening she had decided to go with it. After all, it involved her best friend, and if it was something bad she wanted to make sure Sakura was going to be alright. Sakura had mentioned before that the blonde was far from a morning person. In fact, she remembered clearly how Sakura had complained how the idiot would have to be dragged out of bed for a mission past noon. With this in mind, Ino decided to go early in the morning so she could carry out her plan without getting caught by the blonde. Not to mention that going through his memories would be much easier if he was unconscious. Once at the hospital she snuck herself past the receptionist, knowing full well that visitors weren't allowed yet for several hours still. After stalking her way over to Naruto's room, she entered and carefully closed the door behind her. Turning to look into the room, she saw Naruto sprawled all across the bed, a trickle of drool running down the corner of his mouth. If it weren't for the drooling, he'd almost pass for cute, she mused to herself as she stared at the blonde for a moment, shaking herself from those thoughts quickly with a shudder. This was Naruto, the loudest and most annoying idiot of Konoha. He was definitely not cute. Sitting down in the chair next to his bed, she took a few breaths, nerves finally getting to her. She was, after all, about to go against her clan's rules concerning the uses of their mind-walking jutsus. This was a private matter, and thus sneaking a peek into the boy's mind was strictly prohibited. After composing herself for a moment, she shook herself from her last half-hearted doubts, as she formed her hands in a seal in the form of a window. Shintenshin no Jutsu. Ino's body fell limp into the chair as she sat there. As she opened her eyes again, she found herself in Naruto's mind. While she hadn't transferred her mind often to someone else, she had figured the mind of people generally looked very much the same. A corridor of sorts with certain points leading to a certain memory or bundle of memories. That didn't seem to be the case for Naruto's mind, however. A chilling shiver shot down her back as she took in the surroundings of what seemed to be a sewer. The walls were a dark somber color, and the surface was covered in ankle-deep water. She couldn't fathom how an upbeat, hyperactive prankster could possibly have such a depressing mindscape, with such a cold sensation flowing through it. Taking a few moments to shake off the uncomfortable feeling she got from the unexpected state of the boy's mind, she eventually set out to explore it. After moving through the disheartening mindscape, she came across a small inlet in the wall to her left. She could barely take a full step into it as she was blocked by a wall with a small square window in it. She places her hands against the wall and looked out through the window. She closed her eyes briefly in concentration, and as she reopened them she found herself in the middle of Konoha. "Get the hell out of my store, monster!" She turned to the voice and saw how a small blonde boy with whisker marks across his cheeks was thrown out of a closed store, followed by the furious-looking owner. "I don't serve the likes of you, now get lost!" came from the man as he glared down at the boy. The man's yelling soon had drawn a lot of attention as a crowd had gathered around the boy. Nearly every single person in the crowd frowning as they saw the cause of the disturbance, their frowns soon turning into hateful glares. Murmurs of monster and demon scum passing through the crowds. "Why won't you sell me any clothes?" said the small boy Ino had instantly recognized as Naruto. He stood up and turned to the crowds that kept glaring menacingly at him. "What have I ever done to any of you?" he yelled again before turning on his heel and running away. The crowd dispersing as he passed through them, his eyes closed so he could avoid all those cruel glares aimed at him. Ino had been witnessing the whole ordeal completely dumbstruck, needing several moments to process what she just saw. She had to shiver at all of the cold glares the people sent at the boy. What was that all about? Demon? Monster? Why were they calling Naruto such things? She found herself back in the sewer-like mindscape again as she was still thinking of what she had seen. Naruto couldn't have been older than 6, maybe 7 at the most. Why was he being treated like that? Sure, he was an annoying prankster, but she thought that was going a little far. To even throw him out of the store like that. She shook it off for now, thinking it was only a one-time event, and she moved on. I still have a ways to go to find the right memories, but really, what the hell was with those hateful looks of everyone? She pondered while moving further ahead, soon finding herself at another indent in the wall on her right, and a bigger pathway to her left, in which she could spot several similar windows as the one from earlier, and the one she could see to her right. She set out going past all the windows she came across. Most memories weren't anything worth of remembrance to Ino, bar the ones that were similar in certain ways to the first memory of Naruto she saw. She noticed there were 2 surprising consistencies amongst his memories, one being the cold, hateful glares he seemed to be getting almost the entire time from almost every villager, and even the majority of Leaf Shinobi. The other was what disturbed her even more than the hate of the village towards him. In each and every memory, bar a few where he was eating at Ichiraku's or the occasional moment where the Sandaime Hokage was talking to him, he was alone. Completely alone. She knew he had no parents, as it wasn't anything close to a secret on the academy. But apart from the old man Tsuchi, his daughter Ayame and the Sandaime Naruto spent his entire childhood all alone. She would see in memories from later on in his life that as he joined the academy he had one more person around him from time to time. It was their teacher Iruka, the only teacher that treated Naruto as an equal to the other students. Moving on to the next window to Naruto's memories, she had already figured these were all from his early childhood, his more recent memories likely to be further back into the eerie mindscape. She decided this was the last one she would look into, feeling bad enough by all the things she had to witness in the blonde's memories. As she opened her eyes she gasped in shock at the sight before her. The blonde boy was being pummeled by 2 older men and a 15-year-old boy. Naruto was cringing on the ground, kicks sent at him as well as the occasional broomstick swing at him. Ino couldn't believe what she was seeing. This was going many times farther than those silent glares always sent at him. She watched in horror as the 3 villagers left the beaten boy laying in the dirt and walked away. Several threats and the regular insults of demon shouted back at him. Only a few moments after the 3 had left him, the boy slowly struggled to push himself back to his feet, wincing and groaning in agony all the way up. Ino was seething from her spot as a mere spectator to this horribly event. Incredible, even after such a beating he still pulls himself to his feet, Ino thought to herself. Her anger briefly lifted in nothing but respect as well as concern for her blonde classmate. Watching as the boy left the scene, muttering something about how things would be different when he became Hokage in the future, a smile crept across her face, recognizing those words instantly from the Naruto of the present. Always yelling that he'd become Hokage no matter what. His determination was beyond admirable, she thought. After finding herself back in the sewers she began to set off again, ignoring the windows she came across as she moves further to the back, hoping to find his more recent memories there. She couldn't stop thinking about all the things she had seen so far, how much verbal and physical abuse Naruto had been put through for no apparent reason at all. Leaving her train of thoughts she began feeling guilty for the way she had treated her fellow blonde in the past. She had been no better than the adults. In fact, only a small handful of their class treated him normally apart from mocking his poor skills as a ninja. Maybe I should be a little nicer to Naruto once in a while when he's not acting like an annoying, loud idiot that is, she mused to herself with a slight nod. It wasn't long before she found herself at the end of the tunnel, walking into a rather large oval-shaped area of the sewer. Several windows seen along the walls, shaped slightly different from the previous ones. This must be where his more recent memories are, I hope. I've had quite enough of this place. Ino walked up to a randomly window and placed her hands against the wall. A bad feeling washed over her as she closed her eyes, not sure if she wanted to find out what happened during the Sasuke retrieval mission or what happened after that. She had never seen the boy as depressed as he was 2 days ago, while he had so much reason to be down in the slumps. Whatever happened must have been even worse for him than his childhood, and Ino wasn't certain she wanted to see it anymore. It seemed she had chosen the one window she had started this mental invasion for. She opened her eyes to the sterile white room of Naruto's hospital room. The blonde's eyes opened and after a short 10 seconds he shot up screaming Sasuke. Before wincing and crashing back into the bed in pain, Ino facepalmed at his antics. Even when just waking up from being mortally wounded he was hyperactive to start off with. And Naruto? You're awake! Sounded from the pinkette standing in the door opening, who slowly stepped inside and closed the door behind her. I knew it! They were hiding something, yelled Ino in her mind, crossing her arms as she let the scene play out before her. The conversation between her best friend and Naruto picked up slowly, with obviously Sasuke as the subject. She blinked in surprise as Sakura suddenly slapped him harshly across the face mid-sentence, and started yelling at him with a venomous tone. Ino's eyes narrowed as she listened to what Sakura was spewing at the blonde before leaving his room with a loud slam of the door. Her gaze switched back to Naruto, who lay in his bed completely destroyed emotionally. She watched as tears formed in his eyes and dripping down his cheeks before she closed her eyes and cut the memory off from here, returning herself to the eerie sewer. Again Ino had to take several moments to compose herself from yet another bad memory from the blonde. Now she knew what happened between the teammates that caused both of them to act so strange. A scowl formed on Ino's face at Sakura's words, and the sheer hostility she showed to Naruto. What the hell was Forehead thinking? Ino let out a frustrated sigh as she moved over to the nearest window. Can she really not see the error in Sasuke's ways? Is she that blind? Heh, and I thought Naruto was a hopeless idiot. She continued her musings. As she stood before the next window she let out a deep sigh. The fight, if it could be called as much, between Naruto and Sakura revolved completely around Sasuke. Naruto had actually seemed somewhat adamant in his opinion that Sasuke was fully intending to kill him. This sparkled her curiosity sky-high once again, even though she was feeling weary of all she had seen thus far. This, however, was the last piece to a puzzle which quite a number of people would like to see solved whether they would admit it or not. With a last sigh she closed her eyes in concentration for the last time. When she reopened her eyes to look into the memory the first thing she saw in front of her was Naruto, using his chakra to slowly climb on top of the water's surface. Behind her, up top of the statue of Uchiha Madara stood Sasuke with his arms crossed and a smug expression across his face. Have you noticed yet, Dobe? I'm not even using my Sharingan. You're not worth it because you are weak. Ino flinched at the raven-haired boy's words. Was Sasuke always this harsh and arrogant? If so, why had she never noticed before? It was then that Ino noticed something off about the blonde. His chakra seemed to skyrocket. It also felt very different from his normal chakra. It was exactly like during the Chunin finals and his fight against Hyuga Neji. However, unlike in his fight with Neji, he seemed to be going through some change physically as well. His fangs began to grow slowly until they protruded his lips. In the meantime his nails were growing out into seemingly razor-sharp claws. His hair had become much more wild as well, and the birthmark whiskers were no longer mere lines but had grown more pronounced and ragged-looking. The picture was complete when Naruto opened his eyes, no longer showing the cerulean blue eyes but instead they were blood-red with slits down the middle. Feral. That was the only word fitting his looks right now, thought Ino while gaping at the blonde with wide eyes. She had little time to look confused at the blonde, as he sped off at a high speed towards Sasuke. It seemed the blonde was too fast even for Sasuke now as he punched his square in the face before the Uchiha could even respond. Naruto seemed to be taking the upper hand as he was giving his raven-haired friend a most painful beating. Even with his Sharingan activated he couldn't defend himself against the feral blonde. Eventually Sasuke crashed into the ground higher up with Naruto lifting him by his collar. I'll drag you back to Konoha even if I have to break your damned legs. You hear me, Sasuke? She heard the blonde say. Even his voice had become feral, growling out in his anger. It was then that Sasuke seemed to snap, kicking Naruto off of him, while yelling several things at him in a harsh, cold tone dripping with hatred. His Sharingan was changing slightly as the third Tomo was formed in it, earning a curious look from Ino. The results of the seemingly small change was instantly noticeable in their fight. The moment the Sharingan changed into its fully matured state, Naruto had been unable to land even a single punch on the Uchiha. The dodging game of the Uchiha didn't last long as he soon launched his own offensive at his blonde friend. This is insane. I never would have thought their fight had been this intense. Those punches they throw at each other would be enough to put most people out instantly. Ino was rocked out of her stupor by a loud scream coming from high up the cliff where a huge wall of flame surged through the air. Ino's eyes widened as she recognized the voice as Naruto's. Was he in the middle of that jutsu? Before the smoke curtain caused by the fire cleared, two figures flew out of it at a high velocity. Sasuke had a tight grip on Naruto as they crashed down into the stone ground beneath them, Naruto taking the majority of the crash with his head, which made Ino flinch, only to once again end up staring in slack-jawed amazement as the blonde forced himself slowly back up to his feet. How can he still get up after that? How is he even still alive? His brain should be splattered, his neck shattered. Ino was losing her focus on the fight for a moment again as she was debating with herself how it looked like Sasuke was indeed trying to kill Naruto no matter what. Chidori! Boomed through the air coming from the raven-haired boy. Ino looked up to see the most horrifying sight she had ever seen. Before her stood Sasuke, with his hand completely pierced through the right half of Naruto's chest. Sasuke's body was completely covered in strange, creepy black spots, the same ones she saw covering his body in the forest of death during the Chunin exams. Only far more malice and murderous intent was dripping off of him than way back then. Sasuke dragged his hand back through the wound and clamped it tightly around Naruto's throat, squeezing his air pipe completely shut. Ino could only stand and watch with a horrified expression at the display before her. Naruto's hand shot up and gripped Sasuke's wrist tightly, instantly pulling the hand off his throat as red chakra slowly began to leak out from him. Managing to pull himself free, Sasuke jumped several meters back to gaze in shock at the sight before him. Naruto was exploding in tremendous amounts of chakra, growing stronger and stronger with every passing second. The wound on his chest closing at a rapid pace, barely taking even just 10 seconds to completely regenerate. Ino's eyes nearly bulged out of their sockets at what she was seeing. Unable to even process it properly, she just stared at Naruto as he took up a fighting stance with the red chakra gone at the moment, glaring fiercely at Sasuke. Forget breaking your legs. I'll break every fucking bone in your body if that's what it takes to put some sense into your thick skull, screamed the feral blonde loudly, his voice carrying something of a demonic tint. One look over at the Uchiha revealed that he was in as much shock as Ino was, completely frozen as a thick layer of blood-red chakra began to form around Naruto's body. The blonde screamed out in pain as the chakra began forming into bestial claws over his hands, and long pointy ears over his head, and as last the tail grew out behind him. The chakra enveloping Naruto felt even more sinister than that of Sasuke's when he was covered in those creepy black spots. It felt evil, with an inhuman desire for blood. Naruto fell forward and landed on his hands, taking up a different stance very akin to that of the Inuzuka clan. Ino failed to register even half of what occurred before her as Naruto lunged at the Uchiha, turning the tide of the battle yet another time with a relentless assault on Sasuke. She shook her head a few times and pinched the bridge of her nose while closing her eyes, trying to calm down from her continuous moments of shock and taking a few deep breaths. She opened her eyes when she felt Sasuke's chakra spiking all of a sudden. She looked up to see the black markings expand over more and more of his skin until it completely covered him. As the glow of the markings died off, she could see that Sasuke had gone through a transformation because of it. His hairdo had expanded greatly, and slightly changed color into a sickly grayish blue, his lips having gained the exact same color. His eyes were black apart from his red Sharingan, and a pitch-black shuriken-shaped mark in the middle of his face running from his forehead down his nose and below his eyes. Both his teeth and his nails had extended a little as well, forming them into small fangs and claws. Ino had barely taken in the new look of the transformed Sasuke as she suddenly blinked her eyes open wearily, looking up at a sterile white ceiling. She rubbed her eyes once before opening them again to see the same white ceiling. It took a moment to realize she was back in Naruto's hospital room. She looked over to the boy to find none other than Tsunade standing over the boy with her index and middle finger pressed against his forehead. She glared furiously at Ino, who instantly broke out in a sweat out of fear for the female Hokage. Knowing full well she was caught red-handed by the older blonde. My office. 10 minutes. SCRAM. Ino stood before the Hokage's office, frozen in place in fear of the older blonde. While Tsunade stayed behind after shooing her off, she was certain that the first thing she'd see on the other side of the door was that terrifying glare. She shuddered once and took a deep breath. Better to not be late, or it'd be even worse, she figured as she opened the door and slumped into the office. She instantly felt a wave of killer intent wash over her, as she was indeed met with Tsunade's eyes, glaring furiously at her. Ino gulped slightly as she walked to the front of the Hokage's desk, remaining quiet and trying to avert her eyes even just a little from the intimidating woman. Tsunade sat back into her high chair, arms crossed in front of her and a scowl adorning her face. She opened her lips to speak, but rather than the screaming Ino had expected, it came out in a low growling tone. What the hell were you thinking? I'm sorry, Hokage-sama. I let curiosity Curiosity? You're telling me you invaded a fellow Leaf Ninja's mind cause you were curious? Yelled the older blonde at her. What the hell was so important about Naruto for you to break several rules and laws for, huh? The issue I mentioned to you about Naruto and Sakura. I was so certain something occurred between them, I allowed that curiosity to convince me of Chuji's words. Akimichi Chuji? Was this his idea? Tsunade asked, a surprised look on her face. No, it wasn't. He was just fed up with me never leaving the subject alone, and said I should just do what he thought I had in mind already. I guess he was right, but I only wanted to know so I might help them if I knew what was wrong, said Ino in a somewhat calmer state of mind. She was relieved she was at least getting some chance at explaining herself. Save it, Ino. You of all people should know the responsibilities that your clan carries for their mind-walking jutsus? Didn't Inoichi tell you never to use it on an ally without any form of permission or consent from the target? Of course he did. Daddy made it very clear to me that as part of the Yamanaka clan we have to respect other people's privacy more so than others, Ino stated, hiding her by now trembling hands behind her back. Then why did you do it anyhow? Did you even realize what would happen if someone else would have caught you invading the mind of a fellow nin? Even one such incident can destroy the trust towards the Yamanakas. Mind readers are difficult to trust if even one of their clan members has already proven they can slip up. Ino flinched at this. She hadn't even thought of the consequences for her family. She considered she could get punished when caught, but not about anything else. Her knees buckled a little as she looked down. I am really sorry, Tsunade-sama, please don't punish my family for this, she said desperately, slowly looking back up at the older woman. A sigh passed Tsunade's lips briefly. I'm not going to punish anyone. Yet. I want you to tell me everything you saw in his mind, everything, she said in a serious tone, looking expectantly at the younger blonde. And for goodness sakes, girl, grab a chair before you collapse. You'll be here for a while anyhow, I assume. Blinking in surprise for a moment, Ino quickly went to take a seat in the high back chair. She hadn't expected to be shown such a small mercy, but she was glad to relieve her buckling knees of her weight for now. She twiddled with her fingers for a moment, avoiding eye contact with the Hokage. She thought of all she had seen in Naruto's memories, all those horrible things that the people of this village had put him through. I'm not sure where to even begin. You've seen more than just what you were looking for, didn't you? The Hokage sighed, rubbing her temples briefly before looking back at the girl. Just begin where your little mind-invading adventure began. And Ino, don't leave anything out. Ino took several moments to replay most of the things she had seen, still unable to comprehend any of it. She looked up at Tsunade with a sad expression, surprising the older blonde. Why did everyone treat him like that, Tsunade-sama? I know he was an annoying prankster, but everyone seemed to hate him just for being alive more than just his silly pranks, she uttered in a trembling tone. Tsunade sighed softly again. I was afraid of this. She's seen a lot of his past as well. Ino, just tell what you've seen for now. Ino began to explain in detail everything she had seen in Naruto's memories from when he was a small boy still. All the glares and looks of disgust he received, how often he would be called things that to her made absolutely no sense at all, or that barely any store in the whole village would even allow him to be inside, let alone buy anything at all. Tsunade was aware of the boy's childhood to have been extremely difficult, but some of the things she heard surprised even her. The boy had received frequent beatings by grown men and left in the dirt after that, thrown out from the orphanage many times if he wasn't being forbidden to join on their small events such as story times or games. She could see that guilt was washing over the younger woman in front of her, as she was talking. She decided to ask the girl about it, giving her a short reprieve from thinking about everything she saw in his past. I've always been mean to him as well. I was just following the crowds by ignoring him and seeing only his annoying pranks. Many of my friends' parents kept saying to stay far away from him, and we just did. Even when we became genin, I never stopped to even try to get to know him, only seeing him an annoying idiot that shouldn't even be a shinobi, Ino said while folding her hands over her lap. Her eyes watered as she spoke, but she fought back the tears constantly. Tsunade smiled slightly at the girl in front of her. Maybe some good could come from her little rebellious act if she would try and see Naruto for him rather than a nuisance. If that were the case, she might be just a little lenient on her punishment of the girl in favor of her, while she'd never admit it openly, favorite genin. The two blondes then resumed discussing the remaining memories Ino had looked into, explaining how Sakura had completely chewed Naruto out for breaking his promise, and doubting Sasuke. Tsunade raised an eyebrow briefly at the lack of Ino using the kun suffix for Sasuke, but ignored it as they carried on. She hid her disappointment in the pinkette to Ino, but inside she was seething. She was clearly still thinking about that traitor of a teammate, only rather than the loyal teammate that risked his life to bring her crush back to her. It most definitely explained the lack of Sakura's presence the past few days, while she visited at least twice a day before he had woken up. Then finally, Ino moved on to tell the Hokage about the fight between the two teammates, how intense it had been, and that Sasuke seemed fully intent on killing the blonde right then and there. Tsunade didn't interrupt the young woman before her the entire time, until Ino was talking about how Sasuke had pierced his hand completely through Naruto's chest, which led to a chain of events she still couldn't comprehend. The image was burned into her eyes, and she described the scene in full detail of how Naruto exploded in a massive amount of chakra all of a sudden. The almost instantaneous healing of his chest wound and his almost demonic-sounding voice. Tsunade leaned forward with her hands on her desk as Ino explained how a thick layer of blood-red chakra coated the boy's body slowly, taking forms of claws around his hands as well as long ears above his head and a tail behind him. Tsunade-sama, that red chakra, what the hell was that? It felt so evil, bloodlust was dripping off of it. It didn't seem like Naruto to emit such a sickening killing intent, Ino stuttered slowly, shuddering in her chair as she recalled how terrifying that strange chakra had felt. Tsunade sighed deeply and rubbed her temples again. The girl had seen far too much about Naruto, and the prisoner locked inside of him. However, the description of how the red chakra had manifested troubled her, something she would have to discuss with Jiraiya when she saw him. Another deep sigh passed her lips as she made her decision. There are things about Naruto that I think you should know after having seen all of this. She waited for a moment till the young blonde looked up at her with wide eyes before continuing. The village has an S-class secret which involves Naruto. All of the adults know about this, which is why Sarutobi-sensei, the Sandaime, instated a law forbidding everyone to ever talk about it. Punishment for breaking this law was death. If possible, Ino's eyes would have bulged open even wider as she was listening intently to Tsunade. She was about to explode in a barrage of questions, but the Hokage cut her off as she raised her hand for silence. Tell me, what do you know about the Kyuubi no Kitsune that attacked Konoha 13 years ago? Huh? We were taught about it at the academy. The Yondaime gave his life to kill the demon and save the village, which is why the Sandaime was reinstated as Hokage at that time. What does that have to do with any of this? Ino asked with a trembling voice. Yes, that is indeed what is being taught at the academy now. That is not the entire truth of it, however. Not even the Yondaime Hokage was strong enough to kill the Kyuubi. Instead, he gave up his own life to seal the demon away into the body of a newborn boy. Tsunade paused briefly as Ino gasped in shock, something she felt she had been doing far too often for her liking today. As you by now might already assume, that boy is Uzumaki Naruto. In the meantime, Naruto was harshly awoken when something large crashed down next to his room. The noise and rumbling caused for him to shoot up in his bed. Without much thinking, he crawled out of his bed, wincing once as his bare feet touched the icy cold floor, and walked to the windows. Pushing the curtains aside, he opened the window and looked outside. Just next to his window stood a tall white-haired man, on top of a large toad Naruto had not seen before. The man had his arms crossed over his chest, and a smug look on his face as he grinned down at the blonde. Yo Gaki, Ero Senin! Yelled the boy in response as he opened the window further for the old Sannin to come in. He then walked over to his bed to crawl back inside. Jiraiya jumped off the toad's head and landed inside the window frame, where he sat down with one leg leaning on the frame and his other foot down on the small strip of concrete beneath him. He looked over at the blonde with a serious look on his face, which was only rarely seen on the old pervert. I came to talk to you about something important. From here on out, I'll take you on as my student and train you personally for the coming 3 years, he said with a rare seriousness in his tone. 3 years? But why? Naruto asked, eyes wide in surprise. Even while they were looking for Tsunade, Jiraiya never gave Naruto his undivided attention. I've gotten some information regarding Akatsuki. He paused for a moment to see if he had the boy's full attention. They will start moving and come after you in 3 to 4 years. We will use that time to get you into shape and able to defend yourself against them. The Sannin said calmly. Like I care. Like there's any time to worry about the future right now. There's no time for me to go and train. I have to go after Sasuke as soon as I get out of here. He could be killed by Orochimaru at any time. The boy yelled, seemingly adamant in his refusal to train under Jiraiya. A smirk crept across Jiraiya's face as the blonde yelled at him. Oh, so you know about Orochimaru's plans concerning Sasuke's body, do you? You know about it too, Ero Senin? The Sannin nodded slowly in response. I've been researching Orochimaru's Fushur no Jutsu. I've found out that once he has used it, he cannot use it again for at least 3 years. And according to my spies, he had gotten impatient and desperate while waiting for Sasuke, and was forced to transfer into someone else's body instead. So it'll be alright for 3 years at least. We've got time. That's not a lie, is it? Is it? Came from the blonde in a desperate voice, looking hopeful at the white-haired man. No, it's the truth. However, you should just forget about Sasuke. Tsunade already informed me of the whole situation. Sasuke went to Orochimaru by his own will. He chose to take that path. Whatever you'll do, you won't change his mind. He's got a lot in common with my old teammate in that aspect. If you're thinking of helping him, forget about it. It's foolish. I don't care what you say or think about him. I still see him as my friend. Jiraiya glared at the boy for half a second before responding in a scolding tone. Do real friends hurt each other? Look at the state you're in. He was trying to kill you. The blonde fell silent instantly, looked down to avert the Sannin's eyes. I know how you feel and what you're going through, Naruto. But you can't let any of this drive you. You're no normal kind. You are the Kyuubi's container, and you have Akatsuki after you because of it. But if you refuse to listen to me and still do it your way and go after Sasuke, then I guess that's the only way. However, keep in mind that someday you will have to face people far more dangerous than Orochimaru. Give up on Sasuke. I don't care what's going to happen. I don't care if I have to life like a fool. I will still become stronger than Sasuke, create better and more powerful jutsus than he'll ever make, and drag his ass back to Konoha. He's just being an idiot right now, and I'll be the one to pound some damn sense into his skull. And I'll beat those damned Akatsuki guys as well. All of them, Naruto yelled with a convinced determination in his voice and beaming of his face. Jiraiya's eyes widened briefly at the start of Naruto's speech, slightly surprised at how convinced of himself he sounded. He slowly looked away, shaking his head while his fists clenched tightly. The boy would simply die on his own, being the idiot that he is. If you would go at it alone, the best you could come up with is some sort of useless perverted little jutsu. But he said as she jumped off the hospital building and landed on the head of the toad that was still there, looking out over the horizon while crossing his arms. An idiot will always be an idiot. But maybe even an idiot can still do something good. Once you get discharged from the hospital, get ready, you idiot. We'll leave as soon as you've recovered fully. I'll be seeing you then, Gaki. He boomed loudly. YOSH. Screamed the blonde out loudly, saluting his new sensei with his trademark grin on his face. A slight nod came from Jiraiya before his toad leapt off into the distance, leaving the blonde to his thoughts for now. What do you mean? Are you saying that Naruto has a powerful demon sealed inside of him? Ino asked in a high-pitched voice, her hand covering her mouth slightly in shock. Tsunade sighed once before looking at the shocked girl in front of her. Yes, Ino, that's exactly what I was saying. The Kyuubi is sealed in Naruto's body. That is the reason why everyone in this village has treated him like you have seen in his memories. It is why he is who he is. But why would they hate him? Even when he was still a small boy. It's not like he had any fault in anything the demon fox did. Ino yelled out, having been told only lead to more questions than it answered and made things only far more confusing. A small smile crept across Tsunade's lips as she listened to the young blonde. I just have one thing to ask of you, Ino. How will this affect your view on Naruto? Do you share the opinion of the majority of this village, that he is a demon? Biddy, that idiot? A demon? Ha! He's too brainless and cheerful to have anything demonic about him. Even a demon couldn't pretend to be that stupid, Ino said while chuckling lightly, mostly trying to calm her own nerves after everything she had seen and heard today. She heard a small chuckle from the Hokage and looked up at her smiling face, receiving an appreciative nod. I am glad to hear that, Ino. He always hides himself behind his mask of happiness, but behind that mask rests a very insecure boy. He's afraid to let anyone know about his prisoner, fearing they would hate him like the villagers. Said Tsunade with a warm smile. His friends would have to find out sooner or later about his secret if he was being targeted by Akatsuki. Having Ino figuring it out early, and seemingly accepting it, could help greatly for Naruto's confidence for telling the rest of the Rookie Nine. I want you to tell him everything, Ino. Tsunade added with a slightly more serious tone, smirking in amusement as the blonde before gasped once and looked at her with a slight fear in her eyes. What? You want me to admit to him that I took advantage of his sleeping state to invade his mind and look into his memories? She asked with a slight trembling in her voice. She wasn't afraid of the boy at all. She did fear having to come clean to the boy and apologize to him, however, fearing the rip it would take out of her pride, apologizing to that idiot. That's exactly what I want. Consider it punishment for your transgressions. And don't leave out that you know about the Kyuubi either. Besides, I'm sure you have countless questions for him on that subject. As you wish, Hokage-sama. Ino responded in a low murmur. Not at all looking forward to that little ordeal, even though she did feel like asking him more about his situation. And maybe she would even apologize for how she treated him all these years, just maybe. No need to get the idiot any ideas in his mind. Good. Then get going before you have any time to come up with a nice story so you can fool him and not blaming you for anything. Said the older blonde with a teasing grin. Oh, and if he decides you should receive more punishment, I'm sure that Konoha's most famous prankster could think of something by himself. She added in an amused tone. Ino gulped at that final remark and nodded meekly, hoping that Naruto would be as forgiving to her as Sakura claimed that he always was to her. Damn it, forehead. Abuse his crush on you like that. Something that'd be useful for me now, though, she mused to herself. She slowly stood up from her chair and bowed before the older woman. I shall take my leave then, Hokage-sama. She said and turned on her heel to leave. Make sure to report back when you're done, Ino. I want to know how he responded to you finding out about his secret. Ino gave a curt hi. Before exiting the office, on her way to the hospital albeit reluctantly, Tsunade smiled to herself as she watched Ino leave. Leaning back against her chair as she gazes at the ceiling in deep thought. That girl might just help him with his burden a little. She took it surprisingly well, she thought to herself. Too big an idiot to possibly be a demon, huh? I'll need to keep that one in mind, she added with a light chuckle. Behind all those insults she could have sworn she saw that the young blonde had grown some respect and maybe even concern for Naruto. She grinned playfully while reaching for the drawer where she stashed a small bottle of sake. Oh yes, this might turn out to be fun. Tsunade-sama. She was just taking a sip from her sake when Shizen frantically barged into her room, the sudden commotion causing her to bend over and spray the sake out of her mouth, almost far enough to soak her apprentice in. Damn it, Shizen! What is it? She barked, annoyed that the woman had once again managed to keep her from drinking her sake while at work. Shizen frowned briefly at her master's drinking habit, but pushed it aside as she looked serious at the Hokage. Tsunade-sama, Haruno Sakura has gone missing. Chapter 4, Truth Time. Unaware of what was going on in the Hokage's office, Ino was slowly pacing over towards the hospital to face her fellow blonde. Just like earlier in the morning, she was moving towards her destination reluctantly. She was supposed, no ordered, to go and admit everything to Naruto and even apologize. She shuddered at the thought. Not only was she admitting fault to that brainless idiot, Tsunade had left it up to the biggest prankster Konoha ever knew to decide her punishment on breaking several rules. She didn't even want to think of all the crazy things he could possibly come up with. No, she'd much rather not mention it and face Tsunade's wrath instead. Her thoughts slowly began to drift to all she had learned of today. Naruto's childhood, the Kyuubi and all the hate it caused towards the boy. Even now, she again felt that hint of respect for him. Even after all that hatred and abuse he endured, he managed to remain a cheerful person. Seemingly happy even, she frowned at the villagers who had treated him so poorly, calling him a demon. HMPF, if he really were a demon, he'd have killed those assholes that beat him up all the time. In fact, they were the monsters, doing such things to such a small boy, she thought to herself. Her pace slowed even more as pondered on what to tell the boy. How was he going to respond to her betraying his trust in his friends by invading his mind? Let alone his reaction when he learns she knows about his darkest secret. Maybe she would start with that bit from the get-go. Naruto would most likely be extremely uncomfortable the moment she tells him she looked into his memories. Best to assure him I don't hate him because of the sealed Kyuubi within him. He's still the same idiot in my eyes, not a demon. A loud, annoying idiot, Ino mused, nodding to herself with a slight smirk spreading across her lips. She would not admit, however, that she had grown a lot of respect for him today. She was brought out of her train of thoughts as the receptionist greeted her. She waved a hand at the woman and greeted her back. She gulped nervously as she walked towards Naruto's room. She was so lost in thoughts she hadn't noticed she was at the hospital already, and she still had absolutely no idea of what to say. One part of her mind was being reluctant to actually having to admit fault and apologize to the idiot, while at the same time she had a lot of questions for him. And another small part of her even thought she should try be more nice to him, to make up for how she treated him at the academy. A deep sigh passed her lips before she pushed the door open. Finding Naruto sitting straight up in his bed, with surprisingly less bandages covering his head. "Ino! What are you doing here?" Ino cringed at the loud voice, frowning annoyed at him. "Quiet down, you idiot. This is still a hospital, you know," she said, sighing deeply as she entered the room. She looked him over and noticed how not a single scar marked his face at all. She figured that must be the extent of the Kyuubi's regenerative powers. Naruto crossed his arms and narrowed his eyes at her, pouting a little. "HMPF came to annoy me again, have you?" he said in an almost taunting-sounding voice. Resisting the urge to honor that remark with a response she normally would give, she pulled up a chair next to the bed and sat down on it, sighing deeply again as she looked at the boy. "I assure you, I could think of better ways to spend my time than to come here and annoy you." "Then why are you here if not to annoy me?" Naruto said while curiously looking at Ino. His eyes then widened a little as he showed his trademark grin. "Oh, I get it, so you do care, whatever. I came here cause Tsunade-sama told me to," she said without thinking. Her hand quickly shot to her mouth. She didn't know what to say still, and wanted to postpone that subject until she did. "Too late now, it seems, Ba-chan? What did I do this time that she sent you as my punishment?" he nearly shouted while pointing at Ino in accusation. "It's not about what you did but what did you just say?" She shot out from her chair and raised her flat hand in the air, glaring furiously at the annoying blonde before her. She watched him flinch back slightly, which caused images of all those times he got beaten up to flood her mind. She sighed and let her hand drop to her side before sitting back down. Her anger subsided a little, but she still glared at him. "I know how hard it is for you. But please shut up for a while. She didn't send me to punish you, okay?" she said while trying to calm down. She very much preferred doing this with a level head, and the infuriating boy didn't make it easy for her to do so. She was slightly surprised at how he suddenly looked more serious. "Huh? Then why did Ba-chan tell you to come here? Is something wrong?" he asked in a more serious tone. Sensing she had his full attention now, she took a deep breath before looking him straight in the eyes. "She sent me as punishment to myself. To confess something." Naruto simply gazed blankly at her, clueless to what she was talking about. He was about to ask her about it, but she raised her hand to cut him off. A soft look in her eyes he wasn't used to receiving from a lot of people, least of all the blonde kunoichi sitting in front of him. "Just let me talk for now, alright? This morning, I did something I'm not particularly proud of. Something I both do and do not regret," she said in a low tone, her nervousness growing by the second. She averted her eyes from Naruto's as she continued. "You and Sakura had been acting really strange since you had woken up 2 days ago. I was certain something occurred between the two of you and wanted to find out what that was. Then there was everyone's reluctance to give any real details on that mission you all went on. I was fed up with knowing so little and I let my curiosity get the better of me. While you were asleep this morning, I snuck into your room. I then used my Shintenshin no Jutsu on you to look through your memories." Only when Ino was done talking, she dared to take a look at Naruto's reaction. Her heart sunk to her feet at what she saw. She thought he'd be angry at her, yell at her even, but what she found instead was far worse. He had paled considerably, and his whole body tensed up. Why would Waido that? Was all Naruto could get past his lips. How much did she see? How much did she find out? Did she know about the Kyuubi? Would she hate him now too, just like the villagers? And would she tell everyone? The questions were soon flooding his mind, but he was brought out of his stupor when Ino continued in a cracked voice. "I know about it, Naruto. I know about the Kyuubi." Naruto's eyes were hiding none of his emotions right now. Ino felt disgusted by her actions as she saw what was in his eyes. Pure fear. Panic. He never wanted his friends to find out about it. Knowing they would all hate him if they learned about his secret. They would all hate him, and he'd end up all alone again. He looked down at his hands and nodded weakly once. I see. Ino's eyes had started to water slightly as she had gazed into those blue eyes. How the immense fear turned into pain before he looked away. She had never seen such hurt in anyone's eyes before, and he was only a 13-year-old boy. Only now did she begin to realize just how horrible his life must have been, far worse than what she made out from his memories. I don't hate you, you know. She blurted out quickly, panicked by what direction this was starting to take. This caused the boy to look up at Ino, his eyes completely void of emotion. Ah, really? Well, you're still an annoying, loud-mouthed idiot. She started as she leant forward a little, a grin forming on her lips in an attempt to lighten the mood even just a little. But other than that. No, I don't hate you. You're an idiot and not a demon, easy as that. She finished with a confident nod as she sat back against the chair. Naruto's face was quickly regaining life as he straightened himself back up a little, though still looking completely flabbergasted. This was Ino, the most annoying kunoichi he ever met, most annoying ninja in general even. When they didn't ignore each other, they'd be in the middle of a verbal warfare with one another instead. And of all people, it was her that claimed to see him for himself and not the Kyuubi. Even though her view of him wasn't exactly flattering, it was better than being hated and called a demon. Look, I know you probably have a lot to think about right now with that pea-sized brain of yours. But this silence is really starting to bug me, Ino said while crossing her arms. Her grin was still gracing her lips as she had to resist laughing several times when he threw her another questioning look as if asking for confirmation. Damn, he's slow. His eyes narrowed as Ino threw another insult his way. Was this her way of showing she didn't hate him? By insulting him as always? That's when something dawned on the boy. She wasn't treating him any different, it seemed. She was insulting him as she always did, being her annoying little self. Very slowly a grin formed on his lips as he looks at Ino again. Wow, Ino. You really know how to make people feel they're not hated. Oh, and I'm not loud. You are. Ino raised an eyebrow at the blonde before her. Did that brainless idiot actually use sarcasm? She was certain she'd never heard that from him before. She giggled softly, putting a hand over her mouth to try keep herself quiet. Once she stopped her laughing, she looked at him with a wide grin, not planning to be outdone by him. Ha, I'll let that one slide just this once. Only 'cause you earn points for even knowing how to use sarcasm with that teeny tiny brain of yours. So you're actually admitting you're loud, Ino? Came the quick response from Naruto, who was grinning back just as widely. Somehow her insults felt a lot more empty than they usually did. He was actually enjoying the verbal warfare. HMPF, sure. I'll admit I'm louder than Hinata, but I'm not nearly half as loud as you are, was Ino's response. She too was for a change enjoying their fighting. The mood was a lot less grim than it was only minutes ago, plus it seemed he wasn't even going to ask her anything else about what she did. All in all, perfect for her. That's cheating. Even Shino is louder than Hinata, said Naruto, crossing his arms and pouting at the way Ino dodged his insult. Her only response was some giggling, after which they fell into a more comfortable silence than they had before. Ino's words played in his mind a few times over. The more he thought about those words, the less insulting her found them. She always called him an idiot, and she still did. He dared glance over at the girl to see she too was deep in thoughts. Ino, did you mean what you said? Being brought out of her thoughts, Ino looked up at him and couldn't help but smile slightly. Of course I did, idiot. Do you really think I'd be sitting here talking like we are if I hated your guts? I guess not. Thank you, Ino. What are you thanking me for? I should be apologizing to you, not being thanked by you. I really shouldn't have done what I did, Naruto. I had no right to invade your privacy to such an extent. Ino responded while looking down, twiddling her fingers a little. It seemed her own conscience wasn't letting her get away with it that easy. Apology accepted, said Naruto with a dull tone. His fox-like grin spreading wide across his face as he saw Ino look at him in disbelief. What, just like that? Well, yeah. I mean, even though I'm not sure what to think of how you found out about that stupid fox. You're one of the very few that accepts me despite of it, and the fact that you of all people came to apologize to me means you really must be sorry. So yeah, I forgive you, he finished with a cheerful tone, his grin nearly splitting his face in half as he himself was proud for the subtle insult he threw in at the blonde kunoichi. Ino nodded slowly. His logic actually made some sense. It made her cringe inside that she could make some sense out of this idiot's logic. In the words of Shikamaru, troublesome. She didn't miss the little insult he added at the end, however, and decided to jab him in his side firmly once before crossing her arms. Thank you for forgiving me, really. But what exactly did you mean by me of all people? Unlike you, I am capable of admitting my faults. She was lying, and she knew it, but no way she was letting Naruto of all people mock her for it. Maybe you are, but does that include doing so to me if it's something small? Okay, fine. I admit it took a tiny miracle and a very intimidating Tsunade-sama to have me apologize to you. Happy now? She snapped at him, slightly frustrated that he looked right through her lies. Either she was losing her touch at lying perfectly, or he had more of a brain, she suspected. Both were, in her opinion, very unlikely. Was the only response from the blonde as he struck a thinking pose. After a few moments, her opened his eyes again and looked at Ino wearily. Well, could you tell me what you have seen while using Shinjir Jutsu? It's called Shintenshin no Jutsu. But yeah, I suppose I could tell you all about your own memories, Ino said with a small grin, but it soon turned into a frown as she dropped her teasing to a more serious tone. Are you sure though? I found out you don't exactly have many pleasant memories, at least not amongst of what I've seen in your head. It's fine. I just want to know what you've seen, Naruto said slowly while looking down at his hands. Alright. Well, first of all, once I had entered into your mind, I was shocked by how cold it felt. To be blunt, it looked like a creepy old sewer with ankle-high water and arid yellow walls. I wasn't expected to find something so depressing as your mindscape. It seemed so contradict to how you act, Ino said calmly, but couldn't help the shivers shooting down her spine as she remembered that creepy sewer. Naruto looked up at her with a questioning look. A sewer? Did you find a sealed gate in there somewhere? Is that how you know about the Kyuubi? He asked, his voice becoming more quiet near the end of his question, but he didn't look away. Ino raised an eyebrow and shook her head. Gate? I haven't seen anything like that. What about it? Wait, you mean you've seen your own mindscape before? She leant forward on the chair a little, her curiosity piqued. A few times when I was on the brink of passing out, I suddenly stood in the middle of the sewer you described. There are many paths to take, but I always ended at the same place. In front of a huge gate with a ceiling tag on it. That is the cage of that stupid fox. Ino looked at the boy as he winced when he mentioned the Kyuubi to her, averting his eyes from her. She knew he'd likely be reluctant to talk about it, but he was clearly more uncomfortable about it than she thought he would be. You don't have to talk about it, Naruto. I haven't seen anything of the Kyuubi itself while looking through your memories, she said in a reassuring tone. Naruto raised his eyebrows when he looked back at her, surprised that she not demand of him to spill it. Don't get me wrong, I do want to know more about it. But you're clearly very uncomfortable to talk about that stupid fox. I'll be happy to listen if you're ready to tell, but I won't push you, Ino continued, answering the unasked question. She felt that this was one subject she couldn't get him to talk about just to sate her own curiosity. Her fellow blonde nodded slowly and straightened himself out a bit against the backboard of the bed. So, can you tell me about what you did see in my head then? He asked in an almost dull voice, a small grin spreading across his lips. Well, if you'd for once keep your mouth shut and not interrupt me, I might be able to. Ino shot back at him with a snarl. Seeing the grin forming on his face didn't help either. The way he could go from a somber state to his usual annoying self was remarkable, she had to admit. After all he's been through as kid, he can still so easily mask his discomfort with cheerfulness. That's quite amazing, she mused to herself as she smiled slightly. Right, where was I before you got me sidetracked with your blabbering? She said while thinking of where to pick up. The creepy sewer I found myself in. Ino began telling everything she had seen about Naruto's memories as a boy. She was beginning to become uncomfortable talking about it, but she had agreed to tell him. And while he was wincing or looking away every now and then at certain points in his less-than-fond memories, she could tell that he was listening intently to her every word. Her occasional insults and snide remarks about some of the villagers that mistreated Naruto helped lighten his mood considerably. To him it was unusual and also pleasant to know that she so clearly disapproved of the treatment he endured even as a young boy. While he had several people that felt the same now, Tsunade, Jiraiya, Iruka, Old Man Tucci and his daughter Ayam. He was certain that Kakashi felt the same way as well. However, none of them had uttered their disgust nearly like Ino had. For once, he was grateful for her usually annoying habit of speaking her mind. Almost an hour had passed when Ino was done with explaining her trip into Naruto's mind, at least the part where she had been looking into his memories from when he was 6 or 7 years old. That's all of the memories I looked into before I decided I didn't want to see any more of it. That's when I started more actively looking for your more recent memories. Those weren't exactly less disturbing. He had kept quiet for the majority of time while Ino was talking, but when Ino mentioned his more recent memories he began to think for a moment. His memories of the past week hadn't exactly been fond ones either. The fight on the roof of the hospital with Sasuke, then the mission to bring Sasuke back to Konoha followed by their fight at the Valley of the End. How much of this had Ino seen when she searched his mind? And did she see what happened when Sakura visited him just after waking up? Can I ask you something, Naruto? Did either of them know? About the Kyuubi I mean, Ino asked carefully, not in the least bit eager to remind the blonde in front of her of his encounter with a certain pinkette friend of hers. Naruto simply shook his reed before responding to her. No, I never told anyone about it. Though Sasuke might have his suspicions by now, I suppose. Why'd you ask? I was just curious if that might have had something to do with what they did, Ino said while clenching her fists. Sasuke may have been far beyond her reach, but she would definitely pound some sense into Sakura when she saw her. Flinching visibly at Ino's response, Naruto looked away a little and began twiddling with his fingers nervously. While it wasn't nearly as bad a secret as him being the container of a powerful demon, he didn't really want people knowing about what had happened between him and his teammates. How much did you see, Ino? He asked quietly, nervously chancing a glance up at her. Ino sighed and leant back a little. I saw how Sakura yelled at you for, in my opinion, no good reason at all. She's blinded by that stupid infatuation we both used to have for Sasuke. Oh, and before you ask, my admiration for him had ended the moment he left the village and nearly gotten my friends and teammates killed who tried to bring him back, she said in with a slight growl in her voice. No matter how annoying he was, or how much she tended to hate him, he didn't deserve to be put up with such worthless teammates. As Sakura-chan was right to be angry at me, not only did I break my promise of a lifetime to her, I told her I thought saw Naruto was interrupted with a harsh slap across his face. He looked up with a shocked expression as Ino stood over him with her hands moving to her hips, like a mother would when scolding her child. Idiot! You don't seriously have doubts whether or not he tried to kill you, do you? If you asked me, it was more than obvious. I saw most of that fight, Naruto. He was fully intending to kill you off right then and there. Ino yelled at him. She couldn't believe that even after all that he was still so loyal to them to try and give them the benefit of the doubt. While it was admirable normally, now it was nothing short of sheer stupidity. Her expression softened a little when Naruto averted his eyes with a pained look in his eyes. Maybe I was a bit too blunt about it, she thought to herself as she sat back into her chair with a sigh. I'm sorry, Naruto. It's just that from where I stood, Sakura was angry at you while Sasuke was the one at fault. You were unconscious for 2 days straight. Not even Chuji and Niji were out that long and they were in a highly critical state. But Forehead can't stop and look at the facts rather than think non-stop of the one that tried to kill her only loyal teammate. If he wanted to kill me, then why didn't he? Sasuke isn't one to not make sure he did what he came to do, so why then did he not kill me? Said Naruto in a cracked voice. That question was tearing at him every time he thought back of their fight. Deep inside, he knew Ino was right. He hated to admit it, but he too felt that Sasuke really did want to kill him. But he didn't. Ino sighed and shook her head. Frankly, she hadn't a clue herself either. She wasn't exactly given much time yet to think about everything much. It was indeed rather strange that Sasuke didn't finish him, considering he was fighting in such a malicious manner throughout the fight. I really don't know. It doesn't make sense judging by how he fought. Maybe he wanted to let you slowly die by your wounds and left you for dead for that reason? I wouldn't exactly put it past him. He looked so sadistic when he transformed, Ino said, filled with disgust as the image of the transformed Uchiha appeared briefly in her mind. Naruto was about to respond, but fell quiet when Ino mentioned Sasuke's transformation. It was exactly like she described it. He enjoyed every second of inflicting pain on him, and it got worse after he let the curse seal mark his entire body. Noticing the lack of response from her fellow blonde, Ino thought it best to change the subject. Even if just a little. Anyway, I'll make sure to slap some sense into Forehead when I see her. Though I won't tell you to expect an apology. She'll probably hate admitting fault to an idiot as much as I do. Ino said with a playful grin. She frowned, however, when her attempt came without success. Naruto didn't even look at her. Before she could open her mouth again, he spoke in a quiet tone. Did you see me using the Kyuubi's chakra as well? Ino was taken aback by this for a moment. He was still worried about what she thought of him and the sealed demon inside him. Yes, Naruto. I did see it. She began. The boy tensed up instantly as she said it, and she let out a deep sigh. Look at me, she demanded with a firm voice, a satisfied smile playing on her lips when he obliged to her. I will be honest with you, and when I'm done, you're going to stop that silly worrying of yours, got it? Yes, it scared me at first when such an evil chakra was leaking out of you and later even enveloped your entire body. But for what little I could see, your eyes weren't filled with malice. And your expression definitely didn't either. Now, when Sasuke transformed, my stomach literally turned. While the Kyuubi's chakra felt pure evil, his felt disgustingly malicious, and the look in his eyes were no different. He was completely comfortable with using such a vile chakra, whereas you clearly were not. The evil chakra that I could sense coming from you didn't nearly bother as much as what I sensed from Sasuke. You didn't act like a demon at all, Naruto. But Sasuke was definitely acting like a monster. Naruto was completely dumbstruck. While Ino had made it clear she had no admiration left for Sasuke, she hadn't even said as much as one kind word about him. And now she was simply calling Sasuke the monster, while he himself was the one with the demon locked away inside of him. Hearing that he didn't disgust her at all felt like a massive boulder was lifted from his shoulder. Thanks, Ino, was all he could utter as he scratched his neck a little while smiling sheepishly. You're welcome, idiot. Glad to see you got some sense in that hollow skull of yours, Ino said with an amused smirk on her face. The completely flabbergasted look on the blonde was simply hilarious. So now that I've told you everything I saw from your memories, can we drop the subject now? I'm quite through with talking about all that depressing stuff. Naruto was slowly regaining his composure and nodded at the blonde. While learning Ino's opinion of him and the Kyuubi was a very pleasant outcome of their long conversation, he too was happy to drop it and try to not thinking about those things anymore for now. Hey, wait, you said you saw almost the whole fight. Why didn't you watch it through to the end? He asked suddenly, remembering how Ino mentioned not having seen the entire fight. And Tsunade-sama caught me while I was still inside your head. She was not happy with me, Ino said with a slightly nervous voice. The woman's initial anger was a terrifying reminder to not piss her off again anytime soon. Ba-chan caught you? What happened then? I bet she was angry, was Naruto's response before he broke out in laughter, seeing Ino pale slightly at the memory of a furious Tsunade. He knew how scary Tsunade could be when she was angry, and it somehow never stopped amusing him to hear about it when that anger was, for a change, not aimed at himself. Oh, she was angry alright, and damn is she scary when you piss her off. I had to meet her in her office within 10 minutes. There she forced me to tell her everything I had seen in your head, after scolding me, of course. After telling her everything, I asked her what that red chakra was that had surrounded you. While she didn't know much of the way it manifested, she did tell me about the QB sealed inside you. She heard me out on my opinion of you in relation to it, and sent me off to confess everything to you afterwards as my punishment. Or part of it anyhow. Ino quickly slapped her hand over her mouth and inwardly cursed herself. She was so busy droning about her earlier conversation with the Hokage that she didn't keep in mind to not tell Naruto of the second part of her judgment. Part of your punishment? What's the other part? Asked Naruto, completely ignoring everything else she had said. Her actions made him all the more curious, and he was definitely finding out what she was talking about. She sighed deeply to herself, certain that the idiot wasn't going to let up on her. Right now she was fiercely debating with herself which was worse, Tsunade's wrath, or being at the prankster's mercy. Wait a second, Tsunade isn't here. I can just smack him one if he comes up with something I don't like, Ino mused to herself, grinning inwardly. Fine, I'll tell you. But I swear if you take advantage of this part of my punishment, Ino said while making a choking gesture with her hands, glaring daggers at the boy before continuing. Tsunade-sama decided that since it was your privacy I've invaded, you were allowed to decide upon the remainder of my punishment. What? Really? Yelled Naruto in an almost high-pitched tone. His smile so wide it threatened to eat at his face. I could think of anything I want, he added in a slightly more contained voice. I fear she did intend that, yes, but you'd better not push it. She growled at him. She just knew he was going to come up with something terribly humiliating, possibly having her end up receiving the wrath of the Hokage after all for not carrying out the punishment he decided on for her. Ramen! Boomed Naruto's excited voice suddenly, shaking Ino out of her thoughts and looked at the blonde before her in confusion. Once I get out of here, you will have to treat me to all the Ichiraku ramen I can eat until I leave with Erosenin. Ino blinked once, twice. Of all the things he could have her do, or get from her, he choose ramen? Sure, it was going to be a hellish amount of ramen knowing his eating habit at the ramen stand. But seriously? This is what she was worried about. She didn't even hear him asking what was wrong as she was lost in her thoughts. Then something dawned on her. Wait, leave? What is he talking about now, and who the hell is Erosenin? Troublesome idiot, Ino winced inwardly, as she used the annoying word her lazy teammate used for just about anything. Okay, just what the hell are you talking about? And who on earth is Erosenin? Didn't I tell why he had to cut himself off when he saw the dangerous glare coming from Ino, causing him to gulp nervously? No, he definitely hadn't told anyone quite yet. Erosenin said he would take me on a 3-year training trip once I get out of this stupid place and back to my full strength again, which shouldn't be long. Whoa, slow down. You mean you'll be away for 3 whole years only to train? And who is this Erosenin you keep talking about? Ino asked. She thought he was going to rush straight back to find Sasuke, but instead he'll be leaving Konoha to train 3 years straight. Yup, and when I get back I'll be way stronger than Sasuke. Then I'm gonna find him and kick his ass all the way back to Konoha like I promised Sakura-chan, Databayo. Ino simply started at him in disbelief. He was going to do nothing other than train for 3 years only to keep his promise to someone that treated him like utter crap. She didn't know why, but somehow his new heights of idiocy only increased her respect for him for his stupid amount of loyalty. So you'll be spending 3 years away from the village, training non-stop, only to bring Sasuke back? And this Erosenin is going to train you? And will you finally tell me who the hell that is already? Naruto ducked back on his bed a little and winced while covering his ears with his hands. When he felt it safe enough to remove his hands, he opened his eyes and looked at Ino's scowling face. He was about to comment on her being painfully loud, but thought better of it for his own sake and instead focused himself on her question. Erosenin? He's a really old pervert that writes really stupid books, the ones that Kakashi-sensei reads all the time. He likes to peek on naked women all the time and calls it his research, and he drinks even more sake than Bachan does. And he steals my money to buy it too. Why are you going on a trip with such a pervert then? How could a lecherous old man possibly train you to become stronger? Ino asked, still confused about why Naruto was so enthusiastic about this man, that he described as being a useless old pervert that stole his money for booze, saying he'll train him. He's really strong. He taught me some awesome jutsu while we were looking for Tsunade Bachan to make her become Hokage. He was Bachan's teammate when they were Genin, or Orochimaru's too. WW what? Why you mean one of the legendary Sannin, Jiraiya-sama is going to train you for 3 years straight? Just so you can bring back a teammate? It was Ino's turn to be flabbergasted now. She knew that he joined Jiraiya in search for Tsunade, but never would have guessed that one of the Sannin would take that idiot as his student. She blinked once when Naruto looked away and scratched his neck nervously. His face more serious than just a few moments again, his stupidly wide smile gone too. Well no, not exactly. At least that is not the reason Erosenin is going to train me, he said in a slightly nervous tone. But it doesn't really matter, does it? Oh no, you're not getting out of this one. I just spent well more than an hour confessing I've been reading your mind while you slept, so you're going to tell me why Jiraiya-sama is going to train you? Ino spoke loudly as she slowly raised her hands and made choking gesture again. And you had better tell the truth or else. Naruto had the common sense to gulp at Ino's threatening gesture and dangerous look in her eyes. Nodding slowly in acknowledgement, hoping she'd calm down a little. Alright, I'll tell you. Do you remember the intruders that came to Konoha shortly after the Sound's invasion? He looked at Ino to find her giving a quick nod before he continued. Well, one of them was the cause why Kakashi-sensei ended up in the hospital for weeks. And all it took him were a couple of seconds, using some strange jutsu or something. He did the same to Sasuke at a small town nearby. That's why Sasuke ended up being in a coma. What? As seconds? It only took him a few seconds to injure Kakashi-sensei that badly? And why was Sasuke with you? And why did that man attack him? Because that man is Uchiha Itachi. He is the one that killed the entire clan years ago, and he is Sasuke's older brother. Sasuke wanted to kill him as his revenge for slaughtering the whole clan. He and his partner, some creepy shark-like freak who is also very strong according to Erosenin, are part of an organization called Akatsuki. Naruto said. His face fell a little at the mentioning of Akatsuki. They would be haunting him for as long as he or they were alive, and that would making it very difficult to bring Sasuke back. Ino brushed away the fact about the Uchiha brothers for now, not caring enough for Sasuke to postpone learning more about this organization Naruto mentioned. Akatsuki? I never heard of them. What do they want? And why did they attack Konoha back then? Erosenin didn't tell me everything he knew about them, or he didn't know a whole lot about them, but he said it was a Group 9's rank missing means that have gathered for one goal only. They want to power the Bijou, which includes the Kyuubi. So basically, they're after me since that stupid fox is sealed inside of me. Erosenin doesn't know what they intend to do with it, but it can't be anything good, that's for sure. It was far from being the first time today that Ino sat there, shocked at what she was hearing. She had managed not to lose her tongue too much after her conversation with Tsunade about Naruto and the Kyuubi. She figured things couldn't get much more shocking to hear, but this was definitely taking the crown. Not only did he have to endure the hate of an entire village because of the Kyuubi, he now had people hunting him down for it as well, and yet he was saying it almost calmly, as if there's nothing to worry about. He was even dedicating his training to bring back Sasuke, rather than doing it to protect himself. Hey Ino, you there? Said Naruto, waving his hand in front of Ino's eyes until she slapped them away with a sneer. Of course I am. Unlike you, I have a brain and need to process such things for a while. Especially after a day like this one. She sighed and rubbed her temples slowly. Seriously, how can you be so calm about it? If what Jiraiya-sama told you is true, you have 9's rank shinobis coming for you. Besides, wouldn't you be more safe inside the walls of Konoha rather than being on the road with only the two of you? Naruto let out a huff of air and looked away, crossing his arms. HMPF. I've got a brain too, you know, and Erosenin said they wouldn't come for me for another 3 to 4 years, so it's safe to travel with him. Besides, there's no way he can be beaten so easily. I'm gonna train hard and beat all of those guys so they can't stop me from bringing Sasuke back. Databeo. Just as Ino was about to respond, the door to the room was swung open and Tsunade walked in. Her face was set in a frown, and she eyed the blonde girl as she walked over to the bed. Good, you're still here, Ino. Tsunade-sama. Ino quickly stood from her chair and bowed in respect for the Hokage. Oh, Ba-chan. What are you doing here? Said Naruto in a loud voice as he smiled widely at the older blonde. Not noticing her sour mood at all, ignoring the hyperactive boy for now, she looked at Ino while crossing her arms. Did you tell him everything you've done? She asked in a stern voice, yet Ino felt that it somehow wasn't entirely directed at her. Why yes I did, Tsunade-sama. Good. And you two are still on good terms with each other? She looked between the two curiously. She had been wondering how it would have gone when Ino confessed her actions to Naruto. Yes, I belie. Of course we are. She may not like me, but we're still friends, said Naruto with his ever-present grin on his face. This caused Ino to look a little surprised at him. He actually considers me a friend even after all the crap I gave him before? She thought to herself before letting out a soft sigh. It's not that I don't like you, Naruto, it's just that you're so annoying and loud all the time. Not letting either of them drift off into some meaningless squabble, Tsunade-sama cleared her throat loudly before speaking up herself. Good. I'm glad to see someone of Naruto's peers accepting him after learning of his secret. Both of the genin smiled first at each other, then at Tsunade with a light nod. The Hokage sighed and rubbed her temples briefly before looking at the two again. Alright you two, I have some bad news for you. Chapter 5, Leaving. Ino sat staring out into nothingness, lost in her thoughts after hearing about her best friend having gone missing. She barely registered it when a hand was placed on her shoulder, squeezing gently. Naruto on the other hand was laying sprawled over the bed, unconscious with a rather sizable bump on his head courtesy of Tsunade's fist. He had tried to rush out after Sakura the moment he heard of her disappearance, having come to the same conclusion Ino had come. She went after Sasuke all by herself. It resulted in the only way in getting him to calm down was by knocking him out, not something Tsunade was all that unfamiliar with. She went after Sasuke, I just know it. Ino thought in her head, tears forming in her eyes at the thought. Had Sakura really not seen the overly obvious facts, too blinded by her infatuation, or did she simply choose his side instead of her friends and family? A sigh finally broke Ino out of her thoughts as she looks up to Tsunade, who looked both tired and frustrated, though she wasn't sure if it was due to the entire day, or just because of Naruto being impossible as always. Ino the Hokage began calmly, looking down at the girl with a softening expression in her eyes. I know this has been a most tiring day for you, but do you have any idea where Sakura might be? Her lower lip quivered for a moment as she meekly nodded, needing a few moments to gather the words. Why yes, I think, Tsunade-sama. When I told you about how Sakura was acting so strange, she had a backpack. She was being very secretive and defensive about everything. More so than normally, I mean, as she went after him, I'm sure of it. She finished with a crack to her voice as a few tears rolled down her cheeks. I feared the girl might have gotten that in her head, but that pretty much confirms it. Tsunade uttered with another deep sigh. I already sent Kakashi out with a tracking squad to try and find her. He had already gotten to the same conclusion as you and I. She then glanced over to Naruto and groaned at the thought of him trying to rush off after her the moment her woke up again. She'd have to put up a watch schedule for him after all, it seems. Tsunade-sama? What will you do when Kakashi-sensei finds Sakura and brings her back? Ino muttered quietly, still feeling broken over her best friend's actions. That depends. Assuming she did indeed go after Sasuke, which seems to be the most likely scenario, she'll be put on probation for however long I deem fit. The Hokage replied calmly before her expression darkened slightly. If, however, the girl has somehow gotten it into her head that instead of trying to bring the Uchiha back all by herself, and rather opted to find, and if possible join him, I'll have her stripped of her status as a Konoha kunoichi with further punishment pending. Ino winced at the more harsh tone Tsunade used at the end, biting nervously on her lower lip. Would Sakura really go so far as to run away from Konoha to be with Sasuke? She would anything to be with Uchiha Sasuke, right Sakura? I'll have all the rookie genin summoned to my office in the morning to inform everyone of what happened. I expect you to be there too, Ino. And don't mention this to anyone till then. I don't want anyone else getting any ideas about going after her. Sighing at the lack of response from the young blonde, she gently placed her hand on her head and smiled warmly at her. You should go home and get some sleep. Been one heck of a day for you, I wager. I'm sure Kakashi will have picked up Sakura's trail soon enough, and hopefully this will just be a misunderstanding, she says softly as she ruffled the girl's hair once, not failing to notice the brief glint of annoyance in Ino's eyes as she messed up a few hairs on her head. Nodding meekly at the older blonde, wiping away the tears from her cheeks and eyes as a slight smile curved her lips eventually. Thank you, Hokage-sama. I'll send someone over to keep Naruto in check for the night. You go get your rest. All of this only resulted in more paperwork. She muttered out the last bit before thinking of something, a mischievous smirk on her lips as she moved to the door. In fact, I'll ask Shizen to watch Naruto. I'm sure she won't mind being here for him. And with her here, I can enjoy myself some well-deserved sake rather than building up a headache with paperwork, she thought with a smug grin at her genius plan. 3 days later, Naruto and Ino sat quietly at the booth of Ichiraku's, waiting for their order of ramen. Naruto had demanded they go the moment he finally got discharged from that damned hospital. He was forced to give up on his attempts to try and go after Sakura when Jiraiya had started keeping an eye on him constantly, on request of Tsunade most likely. Ino had at first welcomed the distraction, having spent the last few days thinking of Sakura, worrying for her best friend too much to show up for training with Asuma and her teammates. Everyone had been shocked by the news that Sakura had disappeared, assumingly in chase of Sasuke. She had not missed the frown on the faces of both her teammates and Shino, nor the low growl coming from Kiba. They had all been informed of Naruto's injuries as well as the conclusion of the retrieval mission beforehand, which she was sure had a negative effect on their opinion about Sakura's actions. She couldn't disagree, however, as she herself felt a deep disappointment for her pinkette friend too. A hand waving in front of her eyes snapped her out of her thoughts, jumping up from her bar stool slightly to look up at the owner of the stand who had just placed her bowl of ramen down in front of her. Oh, sorry about that, Tuchi-san. Thank you, she said quickly with a polite bow of her head. Naruto chuckled at Ino before digging in himself, gorging down his ramen without anything even remotely related to table manners if the slurping was any indication. He had cheered up a fair bit with the knowledge of Kakashi looking for Sakura and had simply said she was trying to get Sasuke back just like he had at first. What are you laughing at, you idiot? And for Kami's sake, can you not eat in such a disgusting manner? Ino yelled from his side as he lifted the bowl in his hands to slurp up the remains before setting it down on the counter with a big grin. Seconds please, he said to Tuchi before turning to Ino. Sorry Ino, did you say something? He droned in a Kakashi-like manner. Ino gritted her teeth in frustration at being ignored, as well as Naruto ordering a second bowl with her money. She huffed and looked away from him, turning to her own bowl of vegetable ramen, and continued to eat it with far more grace and manner than Naruto had, trying her best to tune out his slurping sounds as he started devouring his second bowl. Just then a third person entered the ramen stand, sitting down next to Naruto with a giant grin threatening to split his face in two. What's this, Gaki? Straight from the hospital to a date, are we? I'm so proud of you. the figure said with a perverted glint in his eyes. At the very mention of it being a date, however, Naruto's eyes bulged and broth from his ramen spurted out his mouth in surprise. A date? No way, I'm here on a date with Ino-Ero-Sennin. He yelled before he felt a hand painfully grabbing his hair and pulling him back a little. Daring a glance over his shoulder, a shudder ran down his spine at the death glare he received. Was that meant as an insult to me, Uzumaki? 'Cause I'm this close to wringing your neck sitting here listening to your disgusting eating habits while I'm the one that has to pay. Ino almost snarled at him as her thumb and index finger were barely apart from one another to show him what she meant. They were interrupted by what could only be described as a perverted giggle. Ooh, she's a feisty one there, Gaki. Violent too. Didn't know you were a masochist, Jiraiya said with a shameless leer to Ino. His joking and humor failed him, however, when he was subjected to an icy, pain-promising glare from Ino, shivering in his seat at that way too familiar kind of glare he often got from his former teammate. Jiraiya-sama, I would really appreciate it if you did not ever mention Naruto and me to be on a date again, Ino said in a sweet, calm voice that made both Naruto and Jiraiya gulp. Ino's eyes darkened then as she finished in a much more menacing yet still low voice. Because the very thought of it makes me want to hurt someone. Naruto contemplated for only a brief moment to defend himself against the insult but was stopped by Jiraiya. I'm sorry, Ino-chan, wasn't aware you were still at the stage of denial. He joked, jumping out from his seat as he heard chopsticks snapping in half. Snickering to himself, he left the stand with a wave over his shoulder. By the way, Naruto, Tsunade wanted to speak to you. And get packing, we leave tomorrow, he said in a more serious tone before jumping out of sight. Ino calmed down as she sat frozen for a moment at that announcement. Naruto, on the other hand, had cheered at the prospect on leaving on his training trip to become, as he had started calling it, really super strong, yelling at the owner of the ramen stand for one more bowl before going to report to Tsunade. She sighed in frustration at his careless way of acting. Baka! You shouldn't keep Hokage-sama waiting just cause you want another bowl of ramen. She scolded at him, but knew it'd be pointless in the end. Naruto, however, stopped himself from digging into the third bowl that Tsuchi already had prepared from him in advance. Ino, you think Sakura-chan managed to find Sasuke? Ino blinked in surprise for a moment. She knew the tracking team hadn't managed to find Sakura yet still, but they hadn't given up on the girl yet. They were still away looking after all. Didn't you say Jiraiya-sama could never manage to find Orochimaru? I doubt Sakura can if even he can't, no matter how smart she is, she asked, her worry for her friend returning again instantly. I just had this feeling they wouldn't find her all this time, so I kinda hoped she'd somehow found him rather than being all alone. Came Naruto's sullen response, his bowl of ramen still remaining untouched. Besides, he said, interrupting her from responding to him, it would make finding her much more easier. Just find Sasuke, drag him back and she'll come back as well. Ino stared at him in both confusion and amazement. How he kept going from depressed to so positive and cheerful was simply beyond her. No wonder his sensei called him the #1 surprising ninja of Konoha. You really think she's with Sasuke right now? Even then, how is that any better after what he did? She questioned him. Naruto simply shrugged in response, getting up from his bar stool, leaving his ramen unattended. Just that same feeling. I guess I think it'd be easier if they were in the same place, 'cause they'd be when I get back from training with Ero-sen and then Oswell. Look for the team, find Sakura-chan Oswell. I'm sure I can convince her to come back, promise. He said with a weird smile, one she had not seen on him before. It seemed more genuine somehow. She turned around in her seat to face away from him, hiding the subtle blush coloring her cheeks. Idiot, she muttered. Ignoring the jab with a widening smile, he turned around and walked off. Better go see what Bachan wants. See ya, Ino. Bye, old man. He yelled over his shoulder. He left? Is he alright? He didn't finish his ramen. It was only his third bowl too. Tsuchi said in a panicked voice, acting like the world was soon coming to an end. Ino looked at the untouched bowl of ramen and pondered it for a moment. Did he just act like that to cheer me up? She mused to herself, unable to stop a slight smile from curving her lips. He really is an idiot. Oh, Bachan, what did you want with me? He shouted out as he practically kicked the door to Tsunade's office open, only to be met with something solid colliding with his head. Damn it, brat, how many times do I have to tell you to learn some damn manners? And stop calling me that already, Bachan. That hurt. He whined and pouted as he stared at Tsunade's stamp that now lay on the floor. Looking up to the slug Sannin, he noticed Kakashi standing to the side of her desk as well, causing his mood to drop almost instantly as he figured the tracking team must have failed. The apologetic look in his lone eye confirming his initial thought, Tsunade let out a deep sigh while rubbing her temples. Soon I'll have some peace and quiet from that headache-inducing brat, she talked to herself. She looked to Kakashi with a slight nod, gesturing him to give the report to Naruto himself. Kakashi gave a nod back and turned to the blonde with a rather sullen expression of his own. Within a week he had seemingly lost 2/3 of his genin team, with the last one about to leave the next morning. Naruto, as you may have figured yourself, with my being here we have not been able to track Sakura down. Whether she has had help we do not know, but her trail was mostly wiped clean behind her. Naruto nodded meekly. He had this feeling the entire time, that they wouldn't find Sakura. but to actually hear Kakashi saying they failed to find and bring her back still hurt him. Hope you're alright, Sakura-chan, and you better not hurt her team though. Before meeting Kakashi's gaze. Naruto, I'm fine, Naruto interrupted Kakashi with a forced smile plastered on his face. I'm sure she's alright, wherever she is. I'll find her and get her to come back, just like Sasuke, when I get back from training with Ero-sennin. Promise, he said in his usual cheerful and energetic tone. Kakashi chuckled lightly at his student. He never ceased to surprise him. I suppose I'd best keep myself in shape in the meanwhile then, huh? Wouldn't do for Team 7 to be reunited with a slacked-off sensei, he said jokingly, receiving a deadpan look from both Naruto and Tsunade alike. You always slack off and show up late, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto muttered. Seeing his opening, Kakashi glanced to Naruto with a dull look in his eye. Did you say something? He said, and was internally laughing as he used his right hand to keep the hyperactive blonde from reaching him in his enraged assault. A cough interrupted the pair, or Kakashi at least, as Naruto was still flailing his arms angrily at the jonin. A sigh passed the blonde's lips as she stood up from her chair and walked around the desk to approach Naruto. With a quick flick of her finger, a Naruto-shaped crater suddenly formed in the far wall of her office, staring at her with pain and fear clear in his eyes, causing her to smirk victoriously. Now that I have your undivided attention, I wanted to ask you if you were ready to leave tomorrow with Jiraiya. Like, oh, I don't know, telling all your friends, for example? He jumped out from the indent his body made in the wall and shouted out at Tsunade. Yup. Totally ready to leave and become really super strong, and Ino knows when I leave, so I'm sure all of Konoha knows by now. He grinned to himself at the jab he made at the blonde he had, admittedly, bonded a fair bit with since her confession. His grin widened into a mischievous one as he pointed at Tsunade. Just you wait. When I get back I'll be so strong you might as well hand me the hat as a welcome back present, you old ha dash. Before he could even finish his last word, a fist collided with her face, sending him through the wall he occupied earlier only to crash into the sturdier one behind it, only to then burst into a puff of smoke, indicating it was only a Kage Bunshin. Tsunade's eyebrow and lips switched dangerously before she snapped. Naruto. Naruto sat atop the Hokage monument, laughing uncontrollably in his success of one-up ing the old hag like that. After controlling his laughter, finally he laid down on the stone and looked up to the sky with a deep sigh. He finally had some time for himself to think, without interruptions or distractions which seemed to be a constant back in the hospital. The first thing that popped into his thoughts was Sasuke. He had stopped trying to lie to himself and by saying it wasn't true, but it was quite clear that his best friend was trying very hard to kill him. It hurt to think about it still, but he was quietly beginning to doubt his desires to bring the Uchiha back. He knew Jiraiya had no intention on helping him go after Sasuke, so he'd have to wait for at least 3 years to start actively looking for him. 3 years for him to spend with that team, Orochimaru. He had the displeasure of meeting Orochimaru directly twice now, as well as having heard quite a bit from Jiraiya about him. He was absolutely certain spending 3 years with that sickening man would likely turn Sasuke even more cold-hearted to his friends, and Konoha as a whole. Maybe it would be best to decide it when he finally met Sasuke again, face to face. He would definitely look from him, but he honestly was unsure about wanting to bring him back after the past few days. As he somewhat made up his mind about Sasuke, his thoughts drifted to Sakura instead. A sad smile forming on his lips. Ever since he had somewhat calmed down after several attempts to go after her and started listening to people, he had been thinking about it. He knew they wouldn't find anything. How, he wasn't sure. But he just knew she was gone, most likely reunited with her Sasuke-kun by now. She'd be happy if that were the case, he imagined. And as much as it hurt him, he hoped that she was. Even if it meant having left the village, leaving him, although he doubted she felt it like that. He blinked his eyes a few times at that thought, lips parting in a quiet gasp as he lay there for several moments. Even in his head he always called her Sakura-chan whenever he thought of her. Not only did he not, he caught himself thinking of her in a way he never had before. He was disappointed in her, and even angry for just leaving to go after her crush. I guess she never did get to the point of actually liking me as a friend, even he thought in painful realization. Trying to change his train of thoughts, he eventually let his mind wander to one of the most surprising things that happened this week, something that baffled him even now. It was his fellow blonde Ino. He had not forgotten her less than kind words for Sasuke lately. After finding out about their fight at the Valley of the End, and having seen the state of her friends, she seemed to loathe her by now former crush. And if that wasn't enough, the loud and annoying blonde had found out about his biggest and darkest secret. She learned of the Kyuubi being sealed inside of him, but instead of fearing or hating him like the majority of the village had ever since he could remember, she accepted him, for him, albeit in a not too flattering manner. After all, she had called him too stupid to possibly be a demon. The blonde had worried for a moment that she might not keep her mouth shut about it, being the queen of Konoha gossip that she is, but she even promised on her own accord to never tell a soul about it. He almost hated to admit it, but in the past days he had grown to like Ino a fair bit because of it. Although she was still as loud and annoying as ever, it somehow felt much more pleasant to spend time with the short-fused blonde with the habit of insulting him. He was actually really enjoying their verbal squabbles, and he was sure he saw a glint of the same in Ino's eyes sometimes. He replayed the last 3 days in his head. His friends had seemed to agree to visit him often after hearing of Sakura's disappearance, since it was almost as if they tagged one another in and out in a constant stream of visitors. He was glad that Lee's team, along with Guy, had shown up before they left on the mission too. He hadn't had a chance to properly thank Lee for his help yet after all, who seemed to have decided Naruto was now his eternal rival due to getting trained by one of the legendary Sannin. He had sweat dropped at that, and noticed that Niji had Oswell while Tenten simply facepalmed at the very idea of it. And then they were forced to lay eyes upon the most horrific genjutsu in existence. Lee and Guy hugged and cried out in joy of Lee having found his rival at some beach at sunset. A shudder went through his entire form at the mere memory of that. Really needed to find some way of dispelling that genjutsu. Everyone seemed to really condemn Sasuke's actions. Even the normally shy and quiet Hinata had agreed to Shino's verbal disapproval of the Uchiha. Surprisingly, Shikamaru had quite a strong opinion on the matter too. On both Sasuke's as Sakura's, seemed that Ino's promise only really counted for his tenant, as it was clear she explained what happened to her teammates. The Nara had outright said he had no respect for Sasuke at all and practically called him a traitor to Konoha. While he had winced at that at first, he silently found himself agreeing to the lazy Chunin. He was a bit more reserved about Sakura, but even then he made it quite clear he couldn't bring himself to worry over someone that abandoned a loyal, caring friend that practically did anything for her. He pondered over his last 3 days in Konoha some more while slowly drifting off into sleep, muttering in his sleep about getting super strong and becoming Hokage soon. The next morning found Naruto slowly strolling down the streets of Konoha towards the main gate. It was much too early for his liking, which was easily seen by the tired half-asleep look on his face. He did praise himself for actually having gotten out of bed all by himself, smirking a little at the thought. Upon approaching the main gate he noticed there to be a fair few people more than he had expected. Jiraiya and Tsunade being there was a given, same for Kakashi, but it seemed that all his classmates as well as Team Guy were present. He looked down to the ground while blushing slightly at the thought they were all there to send him off on his training trip with the old pervert. Tsunade stood at the end of the line of Naruto's peers, her arms crossed as she looked up to see Naruto approaching. She smiled softly as she spotted the light blush on the boy's cheeks. She could practically feel the smirk on Jiraiya's lips as well. A quick glance to her left showed Shizen smiling at the blonde boy as well. She watched as one team at a time walked up to Naruto to say their goodbye. A handshake here, a fist bump there in Kiba's case. It was good to see he had gotten good friends after being alone for so long, and they were all here to remind him of that it seemed. Even the shy Hinata seemed to manage to utter more than a few words without too much stuttering, while the usual blush was still painting her pale cheeks red. After all the goodbyes from his friends and their sensei, he stood in front of Shizen with a big grin. "Make sure to keep Bachan off the sake, Shizen-ne-chan," he said happily. The woman giggled and leaned down to wrap him in a firm hug. "I will, Naruto-kun. You just be careful, and don't push yourself too hard in your training with Jiraiya-sama," she replied softly. His only response to that was a quick nod, but his widened grin told her he'd definitely be pushing himself too far more than once. Naruto turned to his sensei, who for once was not reading his precious orange book, and I smiled at him. "You've grown a lot since the first day you became a genin. I'm sure you'll become much stronger these coming years, Of course. Better stop being lazy, Kakashi-sensei. Or else I might become stronger than you," Naruto shouted out while pointing a finger almost tauntingly at his sensei, who simply nodded once with a sly smirk under his mask. Tsunade had made sure he wouldn't be slacking off. With his whole team gone and Umbu still recovering from the invasion, she had told him to pick up the slack within the ranks for the next 3 years. He had not missed the almost sadistic grin on the Hokage's lips at the mention of putting him hard to work. He walked up to Tsunade and smiled up at her, but suddenly remembered his prank from the day before and began to sweat lightly in front of her. "And any Bachan," he started, but was interrupted as he saw her index finger move to his forehead. He flinched and braced himself for the impact which never came. Eyes popped open when a familiar feeling touched his forehead instead, looking up to see Tsunade gently kissing his brow before smiling down at him. He blushed lightly as he had done last time. "Much as a nuisance you are, brat. I'll be missing you," she said before a shadow clouded her eyes that carried a promise of unworldly pain. "And don't you be taking over any of that pervert's filthy habits, you hear me?" The genin's eyes widened and he visibly paled at the not-so-subtle threat of the older blonde, quietly nodding his head once while shivering in his boots. He noticed Tsunade's glare moving to Jiraiya after his nod and saw the white-haired pervert paling slightly with a few quick nods as well. He was sure he heard several people behind him snickering at his predicament. "Well, Naruto, time to get going. We've got a lot to do, and a fair bit to travel for today," he said and turned to the road, looking over his shoulder once to Tsunade with a lecherous grin. "See you in 3 years, Haim. I can barely wait already." Tsunade, however, managed to keep her cool and just shooed him off with her right hand, a subtle grin playing at her lips. "Naruto, hold up!" he heard behind him just as he set off after Jiraiya. Turning back he saw Ino walking up to him. He cocked his head curiously at her, wondering what she'd want. "What, Ino? You already said goodbye just now. Missing me alrl?" He groaned as he was interrupted by a smack on his head courtesy of Ino's fist. "Shut up, idiot. I was trying to say something," She paused briefly to take a deep breath and collect her words for herself. I just wanted to say that promise you made yesterday, about bringing Sakura back. I won't let you do that alone. When you get back, I'm gonna help bring that idiot forehead back, she said loudly, causing Naruto to gawk at her for a moment. Did that mean that I know, was going to train? He wasn't sure what to think of it, but figured she'd want to get her best friend back really bad. He gave her a wide grin and a thumbs up with the good guy's pose he'd seen from Lee and Guy, who, he noticed, were now bawling their eyes out in sheer happiness of his using that pose. Sure, we'll drag those idiots back, kicking and screaming if need be, he said before turning back to walk up to Jiraiya. They nodded at each other, turned to their friends with one last wave before setting out on their 3-year-long trip. He had decided to keep his doubts to bringing back Sasuke pending till he met him face to face the day before, but he saw the determined look in Ino's eyes to get her best friend back. Knowing Sakura wasn't coming back without the bastard, it seemed he'd have to go after him. After all, he did promise Ino. And after accepting him for who he is, rather than the stupid fox, he felt he owed her that. Nodding to himself with a smile, Sasuke, Sakura, you two better watch out. I'll drag your sorry asses back to Konoha, like it or not, Databeo. Ino stood there gawking on the spot as she watched Naruto turn and leave. She had expected him to mock her determination, not to accept it and cheer her on. She didn't miss the fact he called Sakura an idiot as well either. She smiled a little at that. Maybe he's not quite as brainless as I thought, she thought, snickering to herself. Still a loudmouthed idiot though, no changing that. What if Naruto brought Sasuke back and left Konoha? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoyed this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down, and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.